See, she had never been inside a place like this before. See, and the moment she walked through those doors, she knew this was a mistake. See, but Lenora Voss had already seen her. Oh, look at that dress. Lenora's voice cut across the room like a blade wrapped in silk. See, she turned to the crowd with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. See, did you sew that yourself, honey? Or did you find it in someone's trash? See, the laughter hit Eliza Marlowe like a slap. She was holding a sewing kit. See, she had come here to work. And now 200 of the wealthiest people in the territory were staring at her like she was something that had crawled in from the mud. See, if that had been you standing there, what would you have done? See, if this story already has your heart pounding, you're in the right place. See, subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell because we release stories like this every single week, and you do not want to miss what comes next. See, and before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me what city or country are you watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. See, now let's get into it. The storm had been building since mid-afternoon. See, Eliza Marlowe could feel it in the way the sky turned that particular shade of yellow-gray that old-timers called a warning sky, the kind that made cattle uneasy and sensible people head indoors. See, she wasn't sensible enough to head indoors because she couldn't afford to be. See, the note she'd received that morning had said, "Come to Briarstone Ranch before 7. The gown repairs needed urgently. Pay is double. Double." See, that word had done something to her chest when she read it. See, not excitement exactly, more like desperate relief. See, because the week before, her mother had spent 3 days barely able to lift her head from the pillow. See, and the doctor had used words like ongoing treatment and continued monitoring that Eliza had learned to translate into a language she understood better, more money. See, so she'd wrapped her sewing kit in oilcloth against the rain, borrowed her neighbor's wagon, and driven 11 miles through the darkening evening to Briarstone Ranch. See, she'd heard of the place, of course. Everyone in Red Willow had heard of it. See, the Rourke family had owned that land for 3 generations. And Briarstone wasn't just a ranch, it was practically its own small kingdom sitting on the western edge of the territory. See, the house alone was said to have 14 rooms. Eliza had grown up in a house with 2. See, but when she pulled the wagon up the long gravel drive and saw the light pouring from every window, when she heard the music drifting out into the rain-heavy air, something in her stomach went wrong. See, that wasn't the sound of a household working late. See, that was a party. She almost turned the wagon around right there. See, almost. Then she thought about her mother's face, pinched and pale against the pillow. See, thought about her youngest sister, Clara, who'd been wearing the same boots for 2 winters now and never once complained. See, thought about the word double on that piece of paper. See, she climbed down from the wagon. The front door was slightly open, which later she would understand was because the household staff was too busy managing 200 guests to remember to close it properly. See, at the time, she thought it meant she was expected. See, she thought she was walking through the tradesman's entrance by mistake. See, she was trying to find someone, a housekeeper, a maid, anyone who could direct her to whoever needed a gown repaired. See, instead, she walked directly into the main entrance hall. See, and the party saw her. The music didn't stop, not all at once. See, but conversations did. In a ripple, starting nearest the door and moving outward, voices went quiet and faces turned. See, Eliza stood there in her best dress navy wool she'd made herself, well stitched and carefully pressed, holding her oilcloth-wrapped sewing kit, with rain-damp hair and mud on the hem of her skirt from where she'd climbed down off the wagon. See, she had about 3 seconds of pure confusion before she understood the situation. See, then Lenora Voss spoke. Eliza didn't know her name yet. See, she only knew the voice, that particular pitch that wealthy women sometimes used, not loud enough to be called shouting, but sharp enough to carry across a crowded room without effort, designed to be overheard by exactly as many people as possible. See, oh my, Lenora was standing perhaps 20 feet away, dressed in pale rose silk that probably cost more than Eliza earned in a year. See, she was beautiful in the way that certain expensive things are beautiful, perfectly arranged, completely impersonal. See, Her dark eyes moved over Eliza from hem to rain-damp hair with the slow, deliberate thoroughness of someone inspecting livestock. See, did a door blow open somewhere? A few people laughed. See, just a few at first, but a few is enough. Eliza felt heat rise in her face. See, her grip tightened on the sewing kit. I'm sorry, she said, keeping her voice as level as she could manage. See, I received a note about a gown repair. I think I may have come to the wrong entrance. See, a note. Lenora repeated it like the word itself was amusing. See, she glanced at the woman standing beside her, a friend, clearly, based on the way they'd immediately aligned against an outside target. See, she received a note. Back to Eliza, honey, look around you. See, this is an engagement celebration. The only needle and thread in this room right now is you. See, more laughter, wider this time. Eliza's jaw tightened. See, she was 24 years old, and she had been talked down to before by customers who thought paying for a service gave them the right to treat the person providing it like furniture. See, by merchants who assumed because she drove a borrowed wagon, she had no standards worth respecting. See, she knew how to absorb it. She'd had years of practice at building a wall behind her expression, while something sharp and private burned behind it. See, but this was different. This was a room full of strangers, watching one person decide to make an example of another, and the only calculation being made was how much sport was available in it. See, she was turning to leave when she heard the man's voice. See, Lenora. It was one word, just her name. But the way it landed in that room made Eliza stop moving without quite deciding to. See, she turned back. She had not noticed Silas Rourke before that moment, which in retrospect seemed nearly impossible. See, he was not a man who blended into crowds. He stood at the edge of the room near the far hallway, tall, dark-haired, dressed in good clothes, that he wore the way men wear things when they don't particularly care about them. See, not careless exactly, just completely unimpressed with the occasion. See, his face was hard in a way that didn't come from cruelty but from something more like chronic exhaustion, the specific tiredness of a man who has been fighting the same battle so long he's forgotten what he was defending originally. See, he was looking at Lenora, and the look on his face was not pleasant. See, that's enough, he said. Lenora's smile didn't disappear entirely. See, it just rearranged itself into something with an edge in it. See, Silas, darling, I heard what you were only. He moved through the crowd without appearing to rush, but people stepped back anyway, clearing a path they hadn't consciously decided to clear. See, he stopped between Eliza and Lenora and addressed neither of them for a moment. See, then he turned to Eliza directly, which she hadn't expected. See, are you all right? She blinked. In her experience, rich men at fancy parties did not ask that question of seamstresses who'd wandered through the wrong door. See, they either ignored them or joined in. I'm fine, she said. See, the automatic answer. The one she'd given so many times it came out before she could decide if it was true. See, something shifted in his expression. Not softened, he didn't seem like a man who softened easily, but he looked at her like he was actually listening to what she'd said rather than waiting for his turn to speak. See, before either of them could say anything else, a second man materialized from the edge of the gathering. See, if Lenora was beautiful in an expensive and impersonal way, her brother Gideon Voss was handsome in a way that seemed designed specifically to intimidate. See, he was the kind of man who had learned to walk into rooms like he owned them, and in most rooms, that habit had been reinforced enough that nobody challenged it. See, he was perhaps 10 years older than Lenora, with the kind of careful, deliberate confidence that came from winning enough arguments that he'd stopped expecting to lose them. See, he looked at Eliza with flat, assessing eyes. Who is this? He asked. See, not of Eliza, of Silas, as if Eliza were an object that had appeared in the room and someone needed to explain it. See, Eliza felt something crystallize in her chest. Not anger, exactly. See, more like a decision being made below the level of conscious thought. See, Silas turned to look at Gideon, and Eliza watched something happen in his face, a calculation, fast and private, running behind his eyes. See, his expression didn't change, but his jaw shifted slightly, and whatever he was thinking in that moment clearly arrived at a conclusion he hadn't been planning to reach when he woke up that morning. See, he turned back to Eliza. He looked at her for exactly 1 second with an expression she couldn't read. See, Then he reached out and took her hand. His hand was large and calloused and warm, and Eliza almost pulled away by reflex because she had no idea what was happening. See, but something about the certainty in his grip, not rough, not demanding, just completely deliberate, made her stay still. See, Silas faced the room. "This celebration is over," he said. See, his voice was calm. The calmness of something that had been decided and wasn't going to be argued with. See, and before everyone goes, there's something I should have said before tonight. He didn't look at Lenora. See, he didn't look at Gideon. He looked out at the assembled crowd of the wealthiest landowners, merchants, and power brokers in the entire territory. See, Eliza is already my wife. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. See, Eliza's hand was still in his. She could feel her own pulse in her fingertips. See, 200 people stared at her. Lenora Voss's face had gone the color of old ash. See, Gideon Voss had gone very still, and Eliza Marlowe, seamstress from Red Willow, who had driven 11 miles through a warning sky to repair a stranger's gown, see, stood in the entrance hall of Briarstone Ranch and understood with absolute clarity that the man holding her hand had just announced something to the world that was not remotely, in any way, true. See, she had never met him before in her life. She turned her head and looked up at him, and he looked down at her, and whatever she expected to find in his face, panic, apology, some signal that he knew this, was insane. She found none of those things. See, what she found instead was something that looked almost like a question. See, will you hold? She had no idea why she didn't pull her hand away. See, she would think about that later, lying in a room she'd been given in Briarstone's east wing while rain hit the windows, and she would not have a clean answer for it. See, maybe it was the way Lenora's face had crumpled. Maybe it was Gideon's stillness, which, for reasons she couldn't articulate, felt more like a threat than his sister's cruelty had. See, maybe it was just that she was tired, bone-tired, in the way that comes from years of fighting alone, and something in the weight of that man's hand felt, for one irrational moment, like someone standing between her and the next thing coming at her. See, she didn't pull away. She turned back to the crowd. See, she said nothing, because he had said everything. And 200 people were looking at her and deciding whether to believe it. See, the first one to move was Gideon. He crossed the room in 8 measured steps, and he stopped directly in front of them, and Eliza felt Silas's grip on her hand shift not tighter, exactly, but firmer, like a man planting his feet. See, Gideon looked at Eliza with those flat, calculating eyes. See, I've never seen you before, he said. No, Eliza said. See, her voice came out steadier than she felt. I don't imagine you travel in the same circles I do. See, Gideon's gaze moved to Silas. This is a lie. That's a serious word to use in a man's own home, Silas said. See, then correct me. Gideon's voice had gone quiet in a way that was worse than anger. See, quiet and precise and absolutely certain of itself. See, tell me when you married her. Tell me where. Tell me who witnessed it. See, Silas held his gaze. Eliza held her breath. The fire crackled in the hearth behind them. See, rain hit the windows. Tell him, Eliza said. Silas looked at her. See, a flicker of surprise quickly controlled. Tell him, she said again. See, quieter. Her eyes asking something she didn't have words for yet. See, Silas looked back at Gideon. That, he said, is between my wife and me. See, Gideon held the silence for another moment. Then he stepped back, and his face rearranged into something smooth and patient, and Eliza understood that this was not a man who lost his footing for long. See, of course, he said pleasantly. There will be time to discuss it. See, he walked away. The party didn't restart. People found their coats, made their excuses, filtered out into the rain. See, Lenora left without looking at either of them, which somehow felt more dangerous than if she'd made a scene. See, Eliza stood in the hall until the last carriage had gone down the drive, and then the hall was quiet, except for the household staff moving through it with the careful efficiency of people pretending not to have seen what they'd seen. See, Silas released her hand. She stepped back. They stood there looking at each other across 2 feet of empty space, and Eliza felt the full strangeness of the moment settle over her like a second skin. See, her heart was still going too fast. Her face was still hot from standing in front of 200 strangers, beings examined like something that didn't belong. See, well, she said finally. Yeah, he said. You want to tell me what just happened? See, he looked at her, and for just a moment, just a flash, something moved across his face that might have been exhaustion, or might have been relief, or might have been both at once. See, inside, he said. I'll explain inside. Eliza thought about her wagon in the drive. See, thought about her sewing kit. Thought about the 11 miles back to Red Willow and her mother's pale face and Clara's worn-out boots. See, then she thought about Gideon Voss's flat, careful eyes and the way he'd said there will be time to discuss it so pleasantly, so patiently, like a man who was very comfortable waiting. See, she picked up her sewing kit from where she'd set it on the hall table. See, fine, she said. But I want tea first. Something crossed his face. See, not a smile she would learn later, that Silas Rourke didn't smile easily and didn't trust anyone who did. See, but something adjacent to it. Something that was at least in the neighborhood. See, I'll have it sent in, he said. And Eliza Marlowe followed a man she had never met into the depths of his 14-room house in the middle of a storm. See, carrying a sewing kit she hadn't needed, after all having no idea that the decision she was about to make inside those walls would change every single thing about the life she'd spent years barely holding together. See, the fire in the study was already lit. Silas closed the door behind them, and the sound of the rain changed muffled now, contained like the storm was something happening somewhere else. See, he moved to the desk and didn't sit. He stood behind it with his hands flat on the surface and looked at her across the room. See, and Eliza got the impression this was a man who'd been rehearsing something for a long time and had now arrived at the moment of saying it without any of the rehearsal feeling like it applied. See, my father, he started. Stopped. Take your time, she said, though she didn't particularly feel patient. See, she sat in the chair across from the desk because her knees had decided they'd had enough of tonight, and she'd be damned if she was going to stand in a stranger's study like she was waiting to be judged. See, she set her sewing kit on the floor beside her and folded her hands in her lap and waited. See, Silas pulled a chair out from behind the desk and sat down too. See, like her sitting had given him permission to, or like he just remembered that people sat down. See, my father made a contract with the Voss family 4 years before he died, he said. See, the contract binds Briarstone to a merger of assets with the Voss holdings. See, it's tied to my marriage specifically, my marriage to Lenora. He paused. See, the penalty clause for non-compliance is substantial enough to effectively destroy everything this ranch has built over 3 generations. See, Eliza looked at him. That man in there, she said. See, Gideon. Controls Lenora's interests entirely. Controls the contract. See, has been waiting for the deadline with. He paused again, choosing his word carefully. See, patience. And the deadline is when? 36 days. See, she let that sit. There's a loophole, she said, not a question. See, because there was always a loophole when a man chose to announce to a crowded room that he was already married. See, men like Silas Rourke didn't make reckless declarations, they made calculated ones that looked reckless. See, the contract specifies I must be unmarried at time of compliance, he said. See, if I'm already legally married, the compliance obligation dissolves. See, Eliza sat with that for a moment. The fire popped. See, rain hit the windows. You need a wife, she said. See, for 1 year, he said. Afterward, how much? See, he looked at her. How much are you offering? She said. See, don't tell me the structure first. Tell me the number. See, he told her. She kept her face completely still, which was the hardest thing she'd done all evening, because the number he said was not a seamstress's number. See, it was not a number from the world she occupied. See, it was the kind of number that meant her mother's doctor bills, and Clara's boots, and her brother Thomas getting to finish his schooling, and something left over, something that might, for the first time in Eliza's entire adult life, see, constitute the beginning of a future rather than the constant management of a crisis. See, 1 year, she said. 1 year. I want my family taken care of during. See, not after during. His jaw shifted slightly, agreed. See, and I won't be a decoration. She met his eyes directly. See, if I'm in this house, I'm in it. I'll learn what needs learning. See, I'll do what needs doing. But I won't sit in a parlor being ornamental while you manage everything and ignore me when it's convenient. See, he held her gaze. Agreed, he said. And he sounded, for the first time, like a man who was genuinely surprised by something. See, Eliza picked up her sewing kit, then she put it back down. See, I'm going to need a room, she said, tonight, the East Wing. See, and I need to send word to my mother, tonight, before she worries. See, I'll have someone ride out, and the tea you promised. See, the almost smile again at the edge of his mouth, gone before it arrived. See, I'll have it sent in. See, Eliza Marlowe, seamstress, oldest daughter, primary earner for a family of 5 24 years old, and tired in a way that went past physical, leaned back in the chair in Silas Rourke's study and told herself she was making a practical decision. See, she told herself it had nothing to do with the way he'd stepped between her and Lenora's voice. See, she told herself it had nothing to do with the way he'd looked at her, will you hold, and somehow known, without words, that the answer would be yes. See, she was practical. She was always practical. This was a transaction. See, outside, the storm finally broke open, and rain came down in sheets against the windows of Briarstone Ranch, and the fire threw shadows long across the floor, and Eliza Marlowe drank her tea across a desk from a stranger who was now, see, by his own declaration in front of 200 witnesses, her husband. See, she had walked through the wrong door, and she was starting to understand, with a feeling she couldn't quite name yet, that the wrong door had been waiting for her specifically. See, but she didn't know that yet. She just drank her tea. See, the tea was cold before Eliza finished it. She didn't notice until she reached the bottom of the cup, and by then it didn't matter. Her mind had been elsewhere for the past 20 minutes. See, running through the conversation she'd just had with Silas Rourke, the way she ran through a complicated stitch pattern before committing needle to cloth. See, checking for errors, looking for the place where the thread would pull wrong. See, she found several. The room they'd given her in the East Wing was clean and plain and larger than the entire front half of her family's house in Red Willow. See, there was a washstand and a proper mirror and a bed with 4 posts and a quilt that looked like it had been made by someone who actually knew what they were doing. See, Eliza sat on the edge of it in her damp navy dress and looked at the ceiling and thought about the number Silas had said. See, then she thought about Gideon Voss's eyes. There will be time to discuss it. See, she'd met men like Gideon before, not rich ones, not powerful ones, but men who had that same quality of patience. See, the kind that wasn't actually patience at all, but something colder. See, the kind that meant they were already planning the next move while you were still reacting to the last one. See, her father had owed money once to a man like that. See, she remembered being 12 years old and watching her father come home looking 5 years older than when he'd left. See, she lay back on the bed without taking her dress off and stared at the ceiling until the candle burned low. See, she didn't sleep well. She wasn't sure she slept at all. See, morning came the way mornings do at working ranches, loud, early, and completely indifferent to whether you were ready for it. See, Eliza heard voices before dawn, the sound of heavy boots on floorboards somewhere below her, the distant low of cattle. See, she was up and dressed before the sun was fully over the ridge, which turned out to matter, because when she came downstairs, she found Silas already at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a ledger open in front of him. See, and he looked up when she walked in with the specific expression of someone who hadn't expected company and wasn't entirely sure how to adjust. See, morning, she said. Morning. He looked back at the ledger, then back at her. See, there's coffee. I see it. She poured herself a cup and sat down across from him, not at the far end of the long table, but directly across, close enough that the ledger between them was readable if she leaned slightly forward. See, which she did. The numbers were not encouraging. Silas noticed her looking and said nothing for a moment. See, then you read ledgers? I manage my family's accounts, she said. See, have since I was 16. She studied the column on the left side of the open page. See, your feed costs are high. He looked at her. Compared to what, he said. See, compared to what I've heard Callaway's operation spends, and they run a larger herd. She sat back. See, could be supplier markup. Could be waste somewhere in the distribution. See, hard to know from one page. Silas held her gaze for a moment, with an expression she was coming to recognize, that particular look of a man recalibrating something internally without any intention of admitting he was doing it. See, he closed the ledger. We should talk about the arrangements, he said. See, and that was how the first real conversation of their arrangement began, not with warmth, not with hostility, but with the careful, See, slightly uncomfortable efficiency of two people trying to build a structure out of material neither of them had worked with before. See, he had a list. She hadn't expected a list, but she supposed she should have. See, men like Silas Rourke didn't operate without lists. See, he laid out the terms the way he probably laid out everything: direct, organized, no unnecessary words. See, they would be seen together in public regularly. She would be introduced to the ranch's business partners and household staff as his wife. See, he would provide her with a clothing allowance, because her current wardrobe, while clearly well-made, would not withstand the scrutiny of the social circles Briarstone moved in. See, he said this without cruelty and without particular delicacy, just as a fact of the situation, the way you'd note that a wagon wheel needed replacing. See, Eliza absorbed this without visible reaction, which cost her something. See, she had made that dress herself. She had been proud of it, in the quiet, private way that people allow themselves pride over things they've worked hard at. See, having it identified as a liability by a man she'd met 12 hours ago was fine. See, it was practical information. She filed it away. "What do you tell people about how we met?" she asked. "See, we've been corresponding for some time," he said. "See, you're from Red Willow. You came out to visit. Things moved quickly. See, we married quietly," because he paused, and she could see him choosing. "See, because I don't like spectacle. That last part will be easy to believe," she said. See, he looked at her. Almost a question. "You don't strike me as a man who enjoys parties," she said. See, that one last night looked like it was happening to you. See, something shifted in his face. It was. Whose idea was it? See, Gideon's. He said it flatly. He wanted to make the engagement official in a public setting. See, something that would be witnessed, documented, difficult to walk back. He picked up his coffee cup, found it empty, set it back down. See, he's been planning this for a long time. Since your father signed the contract. See, since before that, probably. He looked at the window, at the early light coming across the ridge. See, my father trusted the Voss family because Gideon presented himself as trustworthy. See, that's what Gideon does. He presents well. Eliza thought about flat eyes and carefully measured steps, and there will be time to discuss it. See, he'll dig into our story, she said. Yes. So we need one. See, a real one. Details. For the first time, something almost wry crossed his face. See, I've had the same thought. They spent the next 2 hours building a history that didn't exist. See, it was strange work, stranger than she'd expected. See, he would ask a question, she would answer, and then she'd ask one back, and slowly a version of themselves accumulated across the kitchen table that was built from real pieces assembled into a false order. See, she told him about Red Willow, about her mother's illness, about the seamstress work, about her siblings in enough detail that she stopped at one point and said, "You're going to need to remember all of this." See, "I have a good memory," he said. "You're going to need a better one," she said. See, Clara's the youngest. She's 9. She's missing a front tooth, and she hates the color green, and she wants to work with horses when she grows up. See, Thomas is 14, and he reads everything he can get his hands on. See, my mother's name is Ruth, and she will absolutely ask you questions if she meets you because she doesn't trust easily, and she didn't raise me to marry someone she's never met. See, Silas had gone still in the way she was starting to recognize, not checked out, but actually listening. See, processing. "When do I meet her?" he asked. "I don't know that you do." See, not yet. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. See, she's not well enough to travel, and I'm not ready to explain this to her face. See, what will you tell her? Eliza looked at the table. See, as close to the truth as I can manage. She paused. See, I won't lie to my mother. There was a silence. Then Silas said quietly, "That's fair." See, she looked up at him because she'd expected pushback. See, he was looking at the table too, and his jaw had that slight shift to it again, the one she'd noticed last night, and she wondered what he was thinking, but didn't ask, because they weren't there yet. See, they weren't anywhere near there yet. They were two strangers sitting across a kitchen table, building a fiction, and the fiction had to come before anything else. See, the household staff was introduced to her that morning. See, there were 11 of them, a housekeeper named Mrs. See, Aldridge, who had worked at Briarstone for 17 years and had a face like weathered oak, polite and completely opaque. A cook named Berta, who was round and direct and looked Eliza up and down with an evaluation. So frank it was almost refreshing. See, 2 housemaids, a groundskeeper, and 6 ranch hands who cycled through the kitchen at intervals for coffee and would not meet her eyes except for one, a younger man named Pete, who shook her hand firmly and said, "Welcome to Briarstone." See, ma'am, with such uncomplicated sincerity that Eliza nearly liked him immediately. See, Mrs. Aldridge had clearly been told what to present and had decided to present it without editorial comment. See, she showed Eliza the house with the efficiency of a military briefing. Here is the kitchen. Here is the parlor. Here is the study you've already been in. Here is the east wing where you'll be staying. Here is the west wing where Mr. Rourke stays. The 2 wings were separated by the main landing and a considerable stretch of hallway. See, Eliza noted this without comment. Mrs. Aldridge noted her noting it, also without comment. See, they understood each other. The part that Eliza hadn't anticipated, hadn't had time to think through in the cold-sailing staring hours of the night before, was the daily reality of it. See, because the arrangement wasn't just a performance for Gideon Voss's benefit. See, it was a performance that had to be continuous, low-level, ambient. See, the way a married couple occupies a house together, the rhythms they fall into those were things that couldn't be manufactured in a morning meeting over coffee. See, they had to be built, day by day, imperfectly and messily, and with a lot of room for things to go wrong. See, the first thing that went wrong happened 4 days in, and it was Eliza's fault. See, she had found, in a storage room off the main kitchen, 6 months' worth of supply records that had been stuffed into a crate with the organizational logic of a windstorm. See, she'd started going through them because she couldn't help herself watching a system bleed, money that could have been saved. Was the kind of problem her brain attached to the way a burr attached to wool. See, she wasn't intending to show Silas anything. She was just looking. See, but she found the discrepancy. It wasn't subtle once you knew where to look. See, supplies being ordered in quantities that didn't match the usage records. See, the difference was consistent, not random, not accidental. See, consistent meant intentional. See, she sat on the floor of that storage room with records spread around her and a cold, unpleasant feeling in her stomach because consistent and intentional in someone else's supply records meant one of 2 things, and neither of them was good. See, she brought it to Silas that evening. He was in the study, always in the study. In the evenings, she was learning, the way some men are always in one particular place when the day releases them. See, he looked up when she came in, and she set the records on the desk without preamble and said, "Look at these." See, he looked. She watched his face as he went through them. See, watched the exact moment he understood what he was looking at. See, "How long have you had these?" he said. 2 hours. She sat down in the chair across the desk, her chair. She was starting to think of it, which was a strange thing to think. See, someone on your staff has been skimming. Not aggressively. See, carefully. The kind of careful that means they expected to keep doing it for a long time. See, his jaw was tight. "My manager oversees these accounts." See, "I know. Henderson has been with this ranch for." See, "I know," she said. "I'm not telling you what to do about it." See, "I'm telling you what I found." He held the records for another long moment. See, then he set them down and looked at her. Really looked at her, the way he had last night in the entrance hall, taking stock of something he hadn't expected to be taking stock of. See, "Where did you find these? Storage room." "They were in a crate." See, "They should have been filed." "They should have been." See, "But they weren't. And I don't think that was an accident." She held his gaze. See, "Someone didn't want these compared against each other." See, the silence stretched. Outside, the evening wind was picking up, moving through the grass with that sound like breathing. See, then Silas said, with a control that was clearly costing him, "Thank you." See, she nodded, got up, stopped at the door. Silas. First time she'd used his name without the prefacing weight of the arrangement between them, and she felt him register it. See, "I told you I wouldn't be decorative." She left him with the records. See, she didn't ask what he did about Henderson. She would find out later from Pete, who told her with the casual frankness of someone who decided she could be trusted that Henderson had been let go quietly at the end of the week. See, which was more consideration than he'd deserved but typical of Silas, who Pete said hated scenes in a tone that suggested he'd seen evidence of this repeatedly. See, what she didn't expect was what came next. Silas appeared in the kitchen the following Saturday morning with a second ledger and set it on the table across from her coffee and said, "Without greeting, show me where else you'd look." See, she stared at him. "You found something in 2 days that Henderson had apparently hidden for." He stopped. "See, just show me where you'd look." They spent 4 hours going through supply records together. See, it was not pleasant work and it was not smooth. They disagreed twice, once about what a particular pattern of numbers meant, once about how serious a smaller discrepancy in the livestock feed records was. See, the second disagreement got heated enough that Eliza said, "You're not listening to me," with a sharpness that surprised her. And Silas said, "I'm listening. I just don't agree," with a sharpness right back. See, and they sat in silence for a moment that was uncomfortable in a way that was almost normal. See, almost the way people who were used to each other fought, rather than the way strangers were careful not to. See, when they found the second discrepancy smaller than the first, differently concealed, they both saw it at the same time and looked up simultaneously, and the look between them was something Eliza didn't have a name for yet. See, not triumph, exactly. More like the specific satisfaction of two people who have found a thing that needed finding. See, good, Silas said. Just the one word, yes, she agreed. See, the ranch hands were slower to warm to her than Pete had been, which was honest and predictable, and Eliza didn't take it personally. See, she was an outsider. She was the boss's wife under circumstances nobody had explained properly, and she had appeared without warning in their working lives. See, she earned their wariness. What she didn't earn at first was their respect. See, that took longer. It started with a small thing, the way these things do. See, she was watching two of the hands' older men, brothers named Cal and Dewey, repair a stretch of fence near the south pasture. See, and she could see that the method they were using was going to hold for maybe 3 weeks before the pressure from the cattle against it started working the post loose again. See, she'd seen her neighbor back home fix fence a different way that held better, and she mentioned it quietly to Cal, without any particular authority behind it. Just, "I've seen it done this way," might hold longer. See, Cal had looked at her with the specific expression of a man being told something by a woman in a domain he considered his, which was not a welcoming expression. See, she shrugged and walked away. She didn't push. 4 days later, when another section of fence failed exactly the way she'd predicted, not the one they'd fixed, but another that had been repaired the same way, Cal came and found her and said, see, with the gruff, embarrassed minimalism of a man who does not apologize easily, "That thing you said about the post setting, see, could show me." She showed him. It spread the way these things spread in working places, not through announcement, but through demonstration, through the accumulated evidence of someone being consistently right about practical things. See, she reorganized the supply ordering process and saved money that nobody had thought about saving because nobody had been looking at it the way she looked at it. See, she fixed a problem with the chicken enclosure that had been losing eggs to predators for 3 months by identifying a gap that everyone had looked at and not seen. See, she did these things without fanfare and without staking territory, and gradually, slowly, and imperfectly, with a few people who never warmed to her at all, Briarstone started to feel like a place where her presence made sense. See, what it didn't do for a long time was feel like home. See, she told herself that was fine. It wasn't supposed to feel like home. See, she had a room in the East Wing and an arrangement and a number that was going to change her family's life, and that was what mattered. See, she was here to do a job. She had done harder jobs for less reward. See, but then there were the social obligations, which were a different kind of hard. See, the first dinner happened 3 weeks and 6 guests, local landowners and their wives, a business partner of Silas's from Harwick County. See, Eliza had known it was coming. She'd prepared for it, the way she prepared for difficult things, which was by researching everything she could find out about the people attending, thinking through the likely conversational territory, see, and making herself a mental map of where the landmines were. See, what she hadn't prepared for was Margaret Hartwell. See, Margaret Hartwell was 60, sharp as a tack, and had the particular gift of the patrician class for asking questions that were socially inoffensive but absolutely devastating in their subtext. See, she sat next to Eliza at dinner and spent 20 minutes conducting what was functionally an interrogation disguised as friendly conversation. See, where had Eliza grown up? In Red Willow. Oh, Red Willow. See, and her family? Her mother was a widow. Her father passed when she was 18. See, and how had she and Silas met through correspondence? How lovely. See, and how long had they corresponded? And why had they not announced the marriage publicly before the engagement party? And didn't Eliza think it was unusual for a man of Silas's standing to marry so privately, so quickly? See, each question was delivered with complete warmth and a social smile, and each one was a nail being tapped carefully into the story Eliza and Silas had built. See, Eliza answered everything with the calm of someone who had rehearsed, and deflected with the skill of someone who had been underestimated in social situations enough times to have developed strategies for it. See, she redirected to Silas. She asked Margaret questions in return. She used the truth, her actual truth, the parts that were real wherever she could, because the realest parts of their constructed story were always the safest. See, but halfway through the main course, Margaret said something that caught her. See, you seem very settled here, Margaret said in a tone that was almost admiring. See, for someone who came to this house only weeks ago. See, and Eliza looked up from her plate and she said, I've been fighting to settle somewhere my whole life. See, this was just the first place I stopped. She didn't know why she said it. See, it came out before her prepared answer, before her strategy. See, it was the truth, and it didn't belong to the performance at all. See, Margaret looked at her for a long moment. Well, she said, see, that I believe. Silas, across the table, had heard. See, she could see it in the way he'd gone very slightly still. See, he didn't look at her. He continued his conversation with the man on his right. See, but when the dinner ended and the guests had gone, and Eliza was in the parlor by the fire, with her shoes finally off, and her feet tucked under her, he came and sat in the armchair across from her, not close, not far. See, the appropriate distance of two people who were and weren't what they appeared to be. See, Margaret Hartwell likes you, he said. Margaret Hartwell thinks I'm interesting, Eliza said. See, that's different. With Margaret, it's the same thing. He paused. See, you handled it well. She looked at the fire. She's going to keep looking. See, everyone is going to keep looking. I know. She stretched her feet closer to the warmth. See, I'm not worried about everyone. I'm worried about Gideon. See, the name landed in the room the way it always did, with the slight change in air pressure of something that mattered. See, he hasn't made a move, Silas said. He's not going to make a move, she said. See, not yet. He's building a case. She looked at Silas. See, that's what patient men do. They don't attack when they're angry. See, they wait until they have enough. Silas looked at her with that measuring expression. See, you've known men like him. Not like him, smaller versions. She held his gaze. See, same method. There was a silence, the fire shifted. See, somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. I should let you rest, he said. See, he started to get up. Silas. He stopped. She didn't know why she was saying this. She hadn't decided to say it. See, what he's building a case toward. Is there anything he could find? Anything real that he doesn't know about? See, the silence was one beat too long, just one beat. Just long enough for her to notice. See, no, he said, nothing he doesn't already know. See, he said goodnight and went upstairs, and Eliza sat by the fire for another hour with the cold feeling from the storage room, the one she'd had when she found the supply records, sitting quietly in her chest. See, one beat too long. She told herself it was nothing. See, she had enough to manage the household, the accounts, the social appearances, the daily labor of being a person she wasn't quite, in a house that wasn't hers, beside a man she was starting to understand in pieces, but didn't yet know in full. See, she told herself that the arrangement was working. See, it was. She could see it in the way the staff moved around her now, not performing deference, but actually including her, actually bringing her problems, because they'd learned she could solve them. See, she could see it in the way Silas looked at her sometimes across the ledger pages, that recalibrating look, the one she was starting to recognize as the closest he came to expressing what he didn't say. See, she could see it in Pete grinning at her from across the yard when something she'd suggested worked, and Berta saving the good coffee for mornings she knew Eliza would be in the kitchen early, and Cal saying yes. See, ma'am, in a tone that had gradually shed its resentment and become, somewhere along the way, something that sounded almost like respect. See, she was building something here. She hadn't planned to build anything except the performance, but something was being built anyway, the way things grow in the space between people who spend enough time in the same rooms. See, she got up from the parlor, banked the fire, and climbed the stairs to the east wing. See, at the top of the stairs, she passed the hallway that led to the west wing, and out of some reflex she didn't examine, she stopped and looked down it. See, the light under Silas's door was still on, later than she'd expected. See, she stood there for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. See, then she went to her room, one beat too long. She was going to need to know what that beat contained. See, not tonight. She was too tired, and the fire was fading, and her feet ached. See, but the feeling told her it mattered, and she had learned, in 24 years of managing things that mattered, to listen to that particular feeling. See, she got into bed. She thought about the ledger, about the discrepancies she'd found, and the ones she hadn't looked for yet. See, about a man with flat eyes who was patient, the way cold weather was patient, not choosing to wait, just inevitable. See, she thought about one beat too long. She fell asleep before she could decide what to do about it, which was probably fine, because some problems needed daylight before they were solvable. See, and Briarstone, despite everything, was a place where daylight kept arriving early, loud, and completely indifferent to whether you were ready. See, she was starting to be ready. That was something. That was, she thought, more than she'd walked in with. See, and for tonight, in a bed that was slowly becoming familiar, in a house that was slowly becoming hers, in ways the contract hadn't specified and couldn't take back, it was enough. See, the ledger was in the back of the filing cabinet, behind a false panel that wasn't quite as false as whoever had built it had intended. See, Eliza found it on a Thursday afternoon in the 7th week of her time at Briarstone, and she almost didn't find it at all. See, she'd been looking for a property deed that misses. See, Aldridge had mentioned in passing something about grazing rights on the northern boundary that had come up in a conversation with one of the ranch hands, and the filing cabinet in the study was organized with the specific chaos of a man who knew. See, where everything was because he'd put it there, which meant that nobody else could find anything at all. See, she'd pulled the bottom drawer entirely out to check behind it, the way she'd learned to do in her mother's house when small things went missing, and the back panel of the cabinet had shifted under her hand. See, just slightly, just enough. She'd stared at it for a moment. See, then she'd pressed it. The ledger inside was older than the ones on the desk. See, the cover was dark with handling, the spine cracked, the kind of wear that meant years of regular use. See, she opened it to the first page and saw a date and a name, and understood immediately that this had belonged to Silas's father. See, she should have put it back. She knew that, even as she carried it to the desk and sat down with it. See, it wasn't hers to read. It was a dead man's private record, hidden deliberately in a place meant not to be found, and whatever was in it was between Robert Rourke and whatever accounting he'd thought he owed himself. See, she opened it anyway, because of one beat too long. See, because of the way Silas had paused that night by the fire before telling her there was nothing Gideon could find. See, because she had learned, over 7 weeks of watching him, that Silas Rourke was not a dishonest man, but he was a man who controlled what he revealed, and when, and the two things were not always the same. See, the first 20 pages were ordinary enough. Property records. See, transaction records. Notes on cattle prices and grazing contracts going back 15 years. See, Robert Rourke had been meticulous in a way his son was not. Every entry dated, every figure cross-referenced. See, she would have admired it under different circumstances. See, then she found the Voss section. It started 11 years ago, years before the formal contract Silas had described. See, payments moving between Rourke accounts and Voss accounts, not large ones at first, the kind of small regular transfers that could mean anything. See, but the notes in the margin were specific. Robert Rourke had been a man who wrote things down, apparently including things he should not have committed to paper. See, GV arrangement extended. Northern Territory access in exchange for continued partnership. See, marriage clause discussed. GV penalty structure agreed. See, S to be informed at appropriate time. GV confirms if S. See, married to L by date specified, full merger proceeds. See, if not, penalties apply as written. S will comply or lose everything. See, Eliza sat very still, S to be informed at appropriate time. See, Silas had not chosen to protect Briarstone from a contract his father had made blindly or in desperation. See, Silas had been a piece on a board that his father and Gideon Voss had arranged together, years before the formal agreement, years before the engagement party. See, years before a stormy evening and a wrong door and a seamstress who'd come to repair a gown she was never meant to repair. See, and then she found the page that changed everything. See, the penalty clause, written out in full in Robert Rourke's careful hand, was not what Silas had described. See, what Silas had described crushing financial penalties, the risk of losing Briarstone was true, but it was incomplete in the specific way that selective truth is always incomplete. See, the clause didn't just threaten financial ruin. See, it contained a provision that Robert Rourke had apparently negotiated and then hidden from his own son. If Silas refused the marriage and the penalties were invoked, the Voss family had the right to contest the land title itself. See, based on a prior claim Robert Rourke had signed away in an earlier agreement to settle a different debt. See, Briarstone's land, not just its money, not just its cattle empire, but the actual ground it stood on, had been used as collateral in a way Silas apparently did not know. See, he hadn't just needed a wife to avoid an unwanted marriage. See, he had needed a wife to prevent the complete destruction of everything, including the title to land 3 generations of his family had built on. See, and he had not told her that. Eliza closed the ledger. See, she sat at the desk in the study that had become familiar to her over 7 weeks, in the house she had started, in private, unguarded moments, to think of as something approaching hers. See, and she felt the particular cold of being lied to by omission by a person she had begun, despite every practical intention not to trust. See, it wasn't rage. She examined it carefully, sitting there, and it was not rage. See, rage was hot and immediate. This was something more structural. The sensation of a floor you'd believed was solid, revealing a crack that had been there the whole time. See, she put the ledger back in the cabinet. She pressed the panel shut. See, she replaced the drawer. Then she went to find Silas. See, he was in the south pasture she knew from Pete, who she passed on her way across the yard, that there'd been a problem with a water line that morning, and Silas had gone out to assess it himself, which was something he did, she'd learned. See, when he was thinking through something he didn't want to discuss yet. See, he used physical work the way other men used distance. See, she found him crouched at the base of a water trough, sleeves rolled to the elbow, mud on his boots and his forearms, examining a pipe coupling that had evidently given up. See, he heard her coming and looked up, and something in her face, whatever expression she was wearing, which she hadn't organized before coming out here, made him straighten slowly. See, Eliza. The ledger, she said. His face did something complicated and fast. See. What ledger? Your father's. The one behind the panel in the bottom drawer of your filing cabinet. She stopped 3 feet from him and stood in the morning sun, with the wind coming off the ridge at her back, and looked at him directly. See, I found the Voss section. I read the penalty clause. See, the full one. The silence lasted long enough that she counted it. See, I can explain, she said. Not loudly. Just cleanly. See, don't start with, I can explain, because it sounds like the beginning of a justification, and I don't want a justification right now. See, I want the truth. All of it. The parts you left out. See, he looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the ground, and she watched his jaw work, and when he looked back up, his face had the expression of a man who has run out of positions to defend and is deciding whether to retreat or to stand. See, he stood. The land title, he said. Yes. My father used it as collateral in 1887. See, I didn't find out until 8 months after he died, when I went through his private papers looking for the deed to the eastern boundary plot. See, the Voss claim on the title is legitimate, legally sound. See, Gideon knows it, and I know it, and if I'd refused the marriage and the penalties were invoked, we wouldn't have just lost money. He paused. See, we would have lost the land, all of it, all of it. See, Eliza breathed. And when I asked you, that night, if there was anything Gideon could find, see, I didn't want to tell you because I was afraid you'd leave. He said it without softening it and without apology, which she respected more than she wanted to. See, You were already in. You'd agreed. I told myself the full scope of it didn't change your situation. The money was the same. The terms were the same. See, it changes my situation because I agreed to a thing, and the thing is bigger than you described, she said. See, it changes my situation because when Gideon comes at us, and he will come at us, he'll come with everything. And I need to know everything to stand against it. See, I can't fight a battle I don't know the shape of. Her voice had stayed level, which was costing her. See, you put me on a field and didn't show me the map. See, he took that. She watched him take it, watched it land in a man who was not accustomed to being held accountable in this particular way. Not because he was arrogant, but because there had not apparently, been anyone in his life who stayed long enough to hold him to anything. His mother had died when he was young. His father had been the kind of man who hid ledgers. And Briarstone, for all its workers and horses and acreage, was a place where Silas Rourke was the authority, which was its own kind of isolation. You're right, he said. She'd been prepared for the argument. She hadn't been prepared for the absence of one. I should have told you, he said it, without about the waver of a man performing contrition, just the flat, tired acknowledgement of someone who had known better and hadn't done better. From the beginning. You asked me directly to tell you the danger, and I gave you a partial answer because I needed you to agree, and I was afraid. That you wouldn't. I would have, she said. You should have trusted me with it. I know that now. The wind moved through the pasture grass. Somewhere behind them, the cattle were making their slow, enormous sounds. Eliza looked at him, at the mud on his forearms and the exhaustion in his face, and the man behind the intimidating Rourke name that she'd been assembling piece by piece over 7 weeks, and she made a decision, not immediately, not without cost, but in the way that decisions with real weight actually get made. Fix the pipe, she said. Then come inside. We need to talk about what he's going to do next. His expression shifted. Something relieved in it. Something that tried not to show. All right, he said. She walked back to the house. She was angry. She was still angry, and she was going to be angry about it for a while longer, which was fair, and she gave herself permission for it. But underneath the anger was the thing she'd been refusing to name for several weeks. The thing that had been growing in the space between them in the kitchen with the ledger pages and in the parlor by the fire, and in 100 small moments she hadn't cataloged because cataloging them, would have meant acknowledging what they added up to. She wasn't ready to name it yet, but it was there. Gideon Voss arrived at Briarstone on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after Eliza found the ledger, and 2 weeks after the conversation by the water trough that had rearranged something between them, not repaired everything, not resolved everything, but shifted the foundation of it enough that she and Silas now occupied a different kind of space together. More honest, more careful with each other, more something else she still wouldn't name. He came without invitation, which was his right, as a man who had contractual business with the property, and he came with a lawyer, which told Eliza everything she needed to know about the purpose of the visit. The lawyer was from Harwick, a city man, expensive suit, briefcase, the kind of expression that had learned to convey nothing on purpose. Mrs. Aldridge came to find Eliza in the supply room, where she was auditing the winter feed orders against current stock levels, and said in the specific neutral tone she used for things she considered above her pay grade editorial lies about Mr. Voss is here with a companion. Mr. Rourke asks if you'd join them in the parlor. Eliza noted that she said asks. She washed her hands, straightened her dress, a good one, a Briarstone one, bought with the clothing allowance, and made with more thought than she'd initially given to such things, because she'd learned that in certain kinds of combat, presentation was part of the arsenal, and she walked to the parlor. Gideon stood when she entered. The lawyer didn't, which told her something about which of them had the manners. Mrs. Rourke, Gideon said. The title was precise. He delivered it the way a man delivers something he considers borrowed. I hope we're not interrupting. Not at all, she said. She sat in the chair beside Silas, not touching, not performing, just placing herself in the room as someone who belonged in it. We've been expecting a conversation. Something moved in Gideon's eyes. Quick and controlled. Have you? You've been patient, she said. See, patient men eventually run out of waiting. Silas said nothing. See, she could feel him, beside her, making the decision to let her lead it, which was its own kind of trust, and she felt it land somewhere in her chest. See, Gideon sat down and crossed one leg over the other, and rested his hands on his knee and looked at them both with the expression of a man who had arrived at the table holding more cards than his opponents. See, I'll be direct, he said. We have reason to believe the marriage of record between yourself and Mr. See, Rourke is fraudulent. Specifically, that it was arranged after the engagement announcement for the purpose of circumventing contractual obligations to the Voss estate. See, the lawyer opened his briefcase. Eliza didn't look at the briefcase. See, that's an interesting position, she said. What evidence supports it? See, the absence of evidence supporting the contrary. Gideon's voice was still pleasant. See, still patient. No wedding record that precedes the evening of the party. See, no witnesses to any ceremony. No correspondence. No public record. No common knowledge in Red Willow of a relationship between yourself and Mr. See, Rourke prior to that evening. He paused. In fact, several residents of Red Willow, when asked, report having no knowledge of any connection between you at all. See, the room was very quiet. Eliza thought about her mother. See, about Thomas. About Clara and her worn-out boots. She thought about what it had taken to walk into this house, to build herself into a piece of it, to earn what she'd earned here. See, she thought about the ledger and the land title, and a man who had finally imperfectly, late at the cost of her anger, told her the truth. See, people in Red Willow, she said, didn't know about it because it wasn't their business to know. See, convenient, Gideon said. Private, she said. There's a difference. She looked at him steadily. See, Mr. Voss, your family has been patient about this contract for a long time. See, I understand why. There's a significant amount at stake for you. See, but what you're describing, a fraudulent marriage, is a serious accusation, and serious accusations require serious proof. See, the absence of public record doesn't constitute proof of fraud. See, the lawyer looked up from his briefcase. His expression had changed slightly. See, not much. Just enough. Gideon was looking at her with flat, careful eyes. See, then convince me, he said, right now. Tell me something a real wife would know. See, it was a test, and she knew it was a test, and the room knew it was a test, and the way he'd phrased it right now was designed to remove the opportunity for preparation or consultation. See, he wanted her unguarded and unrehearsed. She held his gaze. See, he takes his coffee without sugar and barely enough milk to change the color, she said. See, he has a habit of going very still when he's made a decision. Before he acts on it, you'd mistake it for hesitation if you didn't know him, but it's the opposite. See, he works past midnight when something is troubling him and won't say what it is. See, he remembers things people tell him, small things, the kind that don't seem to matter, and uses them later in ways that catch you off guard because you didn't think he was paying attention. She paused. See, he's been paying attention. The room held. Gideon's jaw was absolutely still. See, she turned to look at Silas because she could feel him looking at her, and what was on his face was something she hadn't seen there before. See, something she didn't have a word for, something that was going to matter later when the room was empty and the lawyer had gone, and it was just the two of them in the quiet of the house they'd built together out of nothing but necessity and time. See, she's described general observations, Gideon said, but his voice had changed by approximately 1 degree, and Eliza heard it. See, that's not evidence of a marriage. No, she said, turning back. See, but it's evidence of a person who knows him. She let it sit. See, which is more than most people can say. Silas leaned forward. See, just slightly, just enough to come into the conversation with his weight behind it. See, you came here with a lawyer and a theory, he said. See, what are you actually prepared to do, Gideon? File a formal challenge, Gideon said. See, contest the marriage on grounds of fraud. Invoke the penalty clause. See, then file it, Silas said, and we'll answer it. See, another silence, different from the first one, heavier, with more history in it. See, Gideon looked at them both for a long moment. Then he stood, and the lawyer closed his briefcase, and Gideon straightened his jacket with the composed deliberateness of a man who was choosing when to escalate. See, I'll be in touch, he said. He looked at Eliza. It was illuminating, Mrs. See, Rourke. She held his gaze. I hope so. He left. The lawyer left behind him. See, Mrs. Aldridge, who had been standing in the hallway with the specific invisibility of a woman who had perfected the art of not being noticed while noticing everything, closed the front door behind them. See, the parlor was quiet. Eliza realized her hands were folded in her lap with a tightness she hadn't been aware of during the conversation. See, she unclenched them and her fingers ached. That was Silas stopped. See, he's going to file, she said. That wasn't a warning visit. See, that was him establishing a baseline. I know, we need a lawyer. See, I know. He was looking at her, still with that expression she didn't have a word for. See, Eliza. Don't, she said. I wasn't going to say anything that needs a don't in front of it. His voice was quiet. See, I was going to say the things you said, about what you know about me. See, those weren't things I told you in the kitchen with the ledger pages. See, she looked at the fire. No, she said, they weren't. See, the acknowledgement sat between them, and neither of them did anything about it, because it wasn't the time, and they both knew it wasn't the time. There was too much incoming, too much to prepare. See, and neither of them was the kind of person who let themselves fall into important things, while other important things were unresolved. See, but it was said now, in its way, and it didn't take it back. See, 3 days after Gideon's visit, Eliza went home to Red Willow for the first time since the storm. See, Silas drove her, which she hadn't expected. She'd assumed she would go alone, had planned for it, but when she came downstairs with her bag on the morning she'd arranged to travel, he was already at the wagon. See, you don't need to do this, she said. No, he agreed. See, but you're about to walk into a conversation with your mother that involves a version of the truth, and whatever Ruth Marlowe is like, he stopped. See, I'd rather be there. She stood on the porch steps and looked at him. See, she's going to ask you hard questions, she said. See, good, he said. I'll answer them. She got in the wagon. See, her mother's house looked the same from the outside, the same patched fence, the same vegetable garden that had grown wild along one edge because nobody had time to attend to it properly. See, the same creak of the gate that her father had never gotten around to fixing, and that had become, in the years after his death, a sound so tied to home that Eliza couldn't imagine the gate being fixed now. See, it would feel like losing something. See, Clara came out of the house at a dead run and launched herself at Eliza before the wagon had fully stopped, which was so completely Clara that Eliza felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight since the night of the storm. See, she held her sister for a moment, 9 years old, and thin and full of a physical exuberance that had never quite matched the size of the life available for it. See, you've been gone so long, Clara said, muffled against her shoulder. See, I know. Thomas says you're rich now. Thomas needs to stop saying things he doesn't know. See, are you rich? I'm fine, Eliza said. We're all fine. See, she became aware that Clara had gone still in the way children go still when they notice something unexpected, and she followed Clara's gaze to where Silas had climbed down from the wagon and was standing at a polite distance, hat in his hands. See, looking like a man who was very aware that he was standing outside a world he hadn't been introduced to. See, is that him? Clara said not quietly. That's him. See, Clara looked at Silas with the frank, thorough evaluation of a 9-year-old who had not yet learned to disguise assessment as politeness. He's big, yes. Does he know I hate green? I told him. See, Clara considered this. Then she wriggled free of Eliza's arms, marched across the yard, and looked directly up at Silas Rourke. See, are you nice to my sister? Silas looked down at her. See, the corner of his mouth moved. I'm trying to be. See, that's not the same as yes. No, he said. It's not. He crouched down so he wasn't looking down quite so far. See, I'm working on it. Clara looked at him for another moment. See, then she looked at Eliza. Then she looked back at Silas. See, okay, she said, and went back inside. Eliza met Silas's eyes across the yard. See, you passed, she said. Did I? She didn't tell you she hates you. See, with Clara, that's passing. Something in his face did the thing that was in the neighborhood of a smile, and this time it lasted long enough to actually be one, brief and private and completely unguarded in a way she had not seen on him before. See, she looked away before it could mean more than she was ready for it to mean. See, her mother was in the front room, sitting in the good chair by the window the way she sat when she was conserving energy, which meant a harder day. See, she looked up when Eliza came in, and her face did the complicated thing it always did: relief and a mother's careful inspection all at once. See, you look well, Ruth Marlowe said. I am well, Eliza said. See, her mother's eyes moved to Silas in the doorway. See, Ruth Marlowe was 52 years old and had the look of a woman who had been beautiful and had traded beauty for something that served her better, a particular kind of clear-eyed steadiness that cost her less than beauty had and gave her more. See, she looked at Silas Rourke with that steadiness, and Silas, to his credit, did not look away. See, sit down, she said to him. Both of you, they sat. See, what followed was the hardest conversation Eliza had had since the one by the water trough, and it was hard in a different way, not confrontational, not hostile, but requiring a kind of honesty she hadn't fully prepared for. See, Ruth Marlowe did not ask the questions Eliza had rehearsed answers for. See, she asked the ones underneath those. She asked Eliza if she was safe. See, she asked Silas what he intended. She asked Eliza, quietly, while Silas was in the kitchen getting water at Ruth's request, the oldest polite device for getting a moment alone with your child, whether she was happy. See, I don't know yet, Eliza said, and it was the truest thing she'd said to her mother in months. See, Ruth looked at her for a long time. Is that his fault? See, no, she said. It's the situation's fault, or nobody's fault. See, she stopped. It's complicated. Most things that matter are, her mother said. See, when Silas came back with the water, Ruth looked at him again with that same steady examination. See, my daughter fixed things, she said, since she was small. See, things that were broken, things that weren't working right. See, she couldn't leave them alone. Silas looked at Eliza. See, I've noticed, he said. See that you let her, Ruth said. See, men like you sometimes mistake fixing for interfering. See, there's a difference. She settled back in her chair. See, she'll know it. Make sure you do. Silas nodded. Not the nod of a man agreeing to end the conversation. See, the nod of a man who had heard something and was actually keeping it. See, on the drive back to Briarstone, they didn't talk for a long time. See, the land opened up on either side of them, late afternoon turning the grass gold, the kind of light that made even ordinary things look like something worth keeping. See, she likes you, Eliza said finally. She tolerated me, Silas said. See, with my mother, that's the same thing. He was quiet for a moment. See, then she's right about what she said. I know she is. See, he paused, choosing. This has been my house, my operation, my problem, for long enough that I forget to leave room for someone else to have a role in it. See, Eliza looked at the road ahead. You've been leaving room. See, not always. No, she said, not always. She let it sit. See, neither have I. The wagon moved through the afternoon. See, the ridge that marked Briarstone's boundary came into view ahead, and as the familiar silhouette of the house rose against the golden rose sky, see, something happened in Eliza's chest, something quiet and involuntary and entirely without her permission. See, it looked like home. She didn't say so. She filed it away in the part of herself she hadn't opened yet, the part where the unnamed things lived, and she looked at it privately and acknowledged it and closed it back up because they weren't there yet, see. But it was there. They reached the house as the last light left the sky, and Pete came to take the horses, and Berta had kept supper warm, and Mrs. See, Aldridge met them at the door with a letter that had arrived while they were gone from a law office in Harwick, formal letterhead addressed to Mr. C. and Mrs. Rourke. Gideon had filed the challenge. Silas took the letter and read it and handed it to Eliza, and she read it and felt the cold settle into her stomach and looked up at him. See? Well, she said. Yeah, he said. They stood in the doorway of Briarstone with the night coming down around the ranch and the challenge letter between them, and Eliza felt the full weight of what was coming, not just the legal battle, see, not just Gideon's patience finally converting to action, but everything underneath it, see. Every piece of what she'd found in the ledger, every piece of what she knew about Silas that she hadn't been taught but had simply accumulated, the way you accumulate things when you stop guarding yourself against them. See, she thought about the one beat too long, that first night by the fire. See, she understood it now. He'd paused because he was afraid of losing her. See, she understood that now. She understood it and she hadn't dealt with it yet, and she was going to have to, see, because Gideon Voss was coming with everything he had, and they were going to have to stand in front of people and prove something that had started as a lie and had become, see, in the 7 weeks and the ledger pages and the supply records and the water trough and her mother's steady eyes had become something else entirely, see, something she still didn't have a word for, but she was starting to understand its shape, see. She folded the letter. "I'll call the lawyer in the morning," she said, see. First thing he said, she walked inside. He followed, see. The door closed behind them, and Briarstone held them both in its 14 rooms and its long history and its complicated future. And outside the stars were coming up over the ridge one by one, indifferent and ancient and brilliant, see. The way stars always are over land that has been fought for and might be again, see. The lawyer's name was Edmund Farr, and he arrived from Harwick on a gray Thursday morning with a battered leather case and the specific kind of calm that either meant he'd seen everything or had learned to pretend he had, see. Eliza liked him immediately, which surprised her because she'd been prepared not to, see. She'd been prepared for a man hired by Silas's money to protect Silas's interests, which was a different thing from a man who might actually help, see. But Farr sat down at the kitchen table, not the study, not the parlor, the kitchen, see, because that was where Eliza had been when he arrived, and she hadn't moved, and he opened his case and looked at them both with the same attention and said, "Tell me everything, see. Start with what's true, and we'll work outward from there, see." That was the right thing to say. So they told him, see, all of it. Not the rehearsed version, not the version built for Gideon's parlor visit or Margaret Hartwell's dinner questions, see. The actual sequence of events, starting with a stormy evening and a note about a gown and a wrong door, moving through a desperate arrangement made across a desk with a cold cup of tea, see, and arriving at what they were now, which was something neither of them had a clean legal term for, but which Farr, to his credit, didn't try to categorize prematurely, see. He listened without interruption. He took notes with a small pencil in a small notebook, see. When they finished, he sat for a moment, looking at what he'd written, see. The challenge is built on 3 claims, he said, see. First, that the marriage predates the announcement fraudulently, see. Second, that it was entered into for the explicit purpose of circumventing contract obligations, see. Third, that no genuine marital relationship exists or existed, see. The first 2 are essentially true, Silas said. Yes, Farr said, see. That's the problem we need to solve and also possibly the solution, see. Eliza looked at him. The Voss challenge assumes that fraud voids the contract protection, Farr said, see. But that argument requires the marriage itself to be fraudulent, not merely the circumstances that motivated it, see. A marriage entered into for financial or strategic reasons is not automatically void, see. Half the marriages in this territory were motivated by land or money or both, see. What matters legally is whether the marriage was real, whether it was performed, whether it was recorded, whether 2 people actually live as married, see. It was recorded, Silas said. We were married by a circuit judge 3 days after the engagement party, see. Farr looked at him. I told her what I needed, Silas said, see. She agreed. We went to Judge Callum in Red Willow, see. It's on record. He paused. The marriage is legal, see. Farr absorbed this. Then Gideon's strongest claim is the third one, see. That no genuine relationship exists. The kitchen was quiet, see. Outside, Pete and Cal were moving through the yard, and the ordinary sounds of the ranch came through the window boots on gravel, the low complaint of cattle somewhere in the south pasture, the creak of the water pump, see. What constitutes genuine? Eliza asked. Farr set his pencil down, see. That's the question the hearing will turn on, not the paperwork, see. Paperwork is there. The question is what the people around you can testify to. He looked at her, then at Silas. See. Who knows you? Not who knows your story, who knows you. See. What you're like together. Eliza thought about Pete, who'd watched her, and Silas go through the supply records with the quiet attention of a man who'd worked for Silas long enough to know this was not normal Silas behavior. See. She thought about Berta and the good coffee saved for early mornings. See. She thought about Cal and the fence post and the way he'd come to find her, hat in hand, to learn what she knew. See, she thought about Mrs. Aldridge, opaque as ever, but who had last week, without being asked, rearranged Eliza's morning schedule to account for a meeting. Silas had mentioned in passing a small thing, an invisible thing, the kind of thing that only happens when a housekeeper has accepted that someone belongs in a house. People know us, she said. Then that's what we build on, Farr said. Truth is a better defense than fiction, and the truth is that whatever started this, it changed. The question is whether we can demonstrate that clearly enough. He stayed 2 days, going through every piece of documentation, building the legal architecture of a defense. He was thorough and unglamorous, and occasionally wrong in ways that Eliza caught and corrected without ceremony, and he took the corrections without ego, which confirmed her initial read on him. By the time he left, they had a structure. The hearing was set for 6 weeks out. Those 6 weeks were the strangest of Eliza's time at Briarstone, and she had already accumulated a significant store of strange. Because knowing that everything might end in 6 weeks did something to the way she and Silas occupied the space between them. It would have been logical for it to create distance for both of them to pull back, to protect against the possibility of losing something by refusing to fully claim it. That was the sensible response. She'd have bet on it before. Instead, it did the opposite. It wasn't dramatic. There was no moment she could point to, no conversation that turned a corner. It was more like the accumulation of small things that had been building for weeks, finally reaching a weight that couldn't be ignored. Him coming to find her in the supply room, not because there was a problem to solve, but because he'd been thinking about something she'd said 2 days ago and wanted to continue the conversation. Her appearing in the study doorway at 11 at night with 2 cups of coffee because the light was still on and she'd made enough for 2. Sitting across from each other at the kitchen table with the ledger pages between them and finding, at some point that neither of them marked, that the ledger pages had been set aside and they were just talking about the ranch, about her family, about things that had nothing to do with the arrangement or the defense or the 6 weeks counting down. She learned that his mother had taught him to read before he started school and had died of a fever when he was 7, and that he still kept her copy of a particular book on the shelf in the study, though he hadn't opened it in years. He learned that Eliza had decided at 16, the year her father died, and the seamstress work became survival rather than supplementary. That she would not be the kind of person who let fear make her small, and that she had kept that decision every single day since, including days when keeping it cost her considerably. She learned that he was funny, in a dry, completely uncommitted way that meant you almost missed it. He learned that she was stubborn in ways that extended beyond professional disagreement into her personal life, which he discovered when he made the mistake of suggesting she rest one afternoon when she had a cold, and she worked through the afternoon entirely to prove a point that both of them knew she didn't need to prove. You could have rested, he said that evening, when she came to dinner with her nose still red and her voice still rough. I could have, she agreed. You didn't need to prove anything. I know that, she said. I know it intellectually. I'm working on the part of me that doesn't. He looked at her across the table. That part is very stubborn. It kept me alive for years, she said. It gets some credit. There was a pause. Then he said quietly, yes, it does. And she looked at him, and the dinner continued, and neither of them said the thing that was becoming increasingly difficult not to say. The fracture, when it came from a direction she hadn't been watching. Lenora Voss had been silent since the night of the party. So silent that Eliza had stopped tracking her, which was its own kind of mistake, the mistake of watching the visible threat and forgetting the one that had gone quiet. Lenora arrived at Briarstone on a Wednesday afternoon, without her brother, without a lawyer, without any of the architecture of confrontation. She arrived alone, in a carriage that Eliza's dress would have cost less than, and she asked Mrs. Aldridge if she could speak with Silas. Silas was in the north pasture. Eliza was in the kitchen. Mrs. Aldridge came to the kitchen and told Eliza and waited. Eliza thought about it for approximately 4 seconds. Show her into the parlor, she said. Tell her Silas will be down shortly. I'll go get him. She went to the north pasture. She found Silas, and she told him Lenora was in the parlor, and she watched his face do the complicated thing it did when something touched territory he'd built walls around. See, I'll speak with her, he said. I know, Eliza said. See, I'm coming too. Eliza, if she has something to say that affects this marriage and this hearing, I'm in the room. She held his gaze. See, that's not negotiable. He looked at her for a moment. See, then he nodded, and they walked back to the house together. See, Lenora stood when they came in. She was beautiful in the way Eliza had clocked from the beginning, perfect arrangement, expensive presentation, but something in it was different today. See, reduced somehow. She looked at Silas, and then she looked at Eliza, and what moved across her face was something complicated and unhappy, and more human than Eliza had been prepared for. See, I won't stay long, Lenora said. Sit down, Silas said. See, they all sat. Lenora folded her hands in her lap and looked at them, and Eliza realized, with a slight shock, that the woman was nervous. See, not in the way of someone planning an attack, in the way of someone who had decided to do something difficult and was making themselves do it. See, my brother doesn't know I'm here, Lenora said. Eliza said nothing. See, he's been managing this situation since before your father died, Silas. See, you know that. She looked at him. You've always known that Gideon and your father arranged most of it between them. See, that I was part of what they arranged. Something tightened in her jaw. See, I'm not coming here to apologize for what happened at the party. See, I behaved badly, and I know it. But I want you to know that the challenge, the formal challenge, the hearing, that's Gideon. See, that's not me. I don't want Briarstone. I never wanted to be managed into a marriage as a business strategy. See, the room was quiet. Why are you telling us this? Eliza asked. See, Lenora looked at her. It was the first time she'd looked at Eliza directly, without the weapon in it. See, because Gideon has something he's planning to bring to the hearing that I think is wrong, she said. See, he has a witness. Someone from Red Willow who'll testify that there was no relationship between you before the party. See, someone he found and prepared. Silas had gone very still. See, a prepared witness, Eliza said. Someone who owes Gideon a debt. Lenora's voice was careful. See, I don't have details. But I know Gideon, and I know when he's built something, and he's built something. She looked at Silas. See, I thought you should know. Silas looked at her for a long moment. See, why? Lenora held his gaze. Because whatever this marriage is or isn't, she's not nothing. She glanced at Eliza. See, and what Gideon is doing with that witness is wrong. See, I can be many things. I can't be someone who watches that happen and says nothing. See, she stood. She left. The parlor felt different after she was gone, not emptier but reconfigured. See, Eliza sat for a moment with what had just happened and turned it over carefully, looking for the angle in it, because she was a person who looked for angles. See, she didn't find one. She's telling the truth, Eliza said. See, I know, Silas said. Gideon doesn't know she came. See, no, she looked at him. A prepared witness, someone from Red Willow who owes him. See, Silas was looking at the floor with the expression she'd learned meant the kind of thinking he didn't want interrupted. See, she waited. There's a man, he said slowly, in Red Willow. See, Arthur Hines. My father lent him money years ago, and the debt transferred to me when my father died. See, I've never pressed it. He paused. Gideon would know about that debt. See, because it's in the old ledger. His jaw tightened. See, yes, Eliza sat with this. So Gideon finds Arthur Hines. See, tells him the debt can be forgiven or called in depending on his answer to one question. She looked at Silas. See, that's coercion. That's Gideon. Can we prove it? See, not easily, not in time. He looked up at her. Far needs to know. See, Far needs to know tonight. She stood. We need to write to him tonight. See, they wrote to Far that evening, laid out what Lenora had said, and sent Pete to Harwick with the letter before dark. See, Far's response came back in 2 days, read it, understood it, was working on it, needed one specific thing from them in return. See, he needed a strong case for genuine relationship, not documentation. See, not affidavits, testimony, real people speaking in a real room about what they had actually witnessed. See, that was the turning point. That was where the 6 weeks changed shape. See, because Eliza and Silas had to sit down together and do the thing that was hardest for both of them, not fight, not manage, not solve a practical problem. See, they had to look at what had actually happened between them and decide, together, what it meant and whether they were willing to say it out loud. See, they did it in the kitchen, where they'd done everything that mattered. See, late at night, the fire low, the house quiet around them. See, Pete will testify, Silas said. He'd testify for Briarstone regardless. But what he'd say about you? See, it's not about me, she said. It has to be about us. See, together. That's what Far needs. He was quiet. Cal, she said. See, he watched us work together for weeks. He's not going to perform anything. See, he's going to say what he saw, and what he saw is real. See, Berta, Silas said. Berta's noticed everything. See, Berta notices more than she says, which makes her more credible than someone who performs. Eliza wrapped both hands around her cup. See, Mrs. Aldridge. Silas looked at her. Mrs. Aldridge doesn't. See, she rearranged my schedule last week to accommodate a meeting you mentioned to me in the hallway. See, she didn't have to do that. She did it because she decided I belonged in the operation of this house. Eliza looked at him steadily. See, she'll say what she saw, and what she saw is real. See, another quiet. Longer. There's one more person, Silas said. See, she knew who he meant before he said it. My mother, she said. See, if she's willing. Ruth Marlowe, 52 years old, not well enough to travel comfortably, with the steady eyes of a woman who had raised Eliza to be honest even when honesty was inconvenient. See, Eliza thought about her mother looking at Silas across the front room. See, make sure you let her. The nod of a man who'd actually heard something. See, I'll ask her, Eliza said. She'll say what she saw too. See, and what she saw, she stopped. He was looking at her. See, what she saw, he said quietly, is that you didn't look like a woman performing a role. See, no, she said, I didn't. The fire popped. The clock on the shelf ticked. See, Eliza. His voice was low and careful, the voice he used when he was being precise about something that mattered. See, I need to say something. She waited. I've been sitting on it because the timing has been wrong every time I've opened my mouth to say it. See, and I recognize that waiting for perfect timing is a thing I do when I'm afraid of what happens after I say something. He looked at the table, see, then back up at her. I'm not going to waiting, because in 6 weeks we're going to walk into a room and be asked to prove something, and I'd rather... He stopped. See, tried again. I'd rather we say it here first, between us. See, before it has to be said in front of anyone. She held very still. See, I fell in love with you, he said. Not at the beginning. See, not at any one moment, but somewhere in the middle of all of it, the ledger pages, and the fence post, and the dinner with Margaret Hartwell, and the argument about the discrepancy and the drive to Red Willow, and 100 other ordinary things I, see, didn't expect to matter. He looked at her steadily. See, I know the arrangement wasn't this. I know you came here for practical reasons, and I gave you partial truths, and you have every right to. See, Silas, she said. He stopped. She looked at him across the kitchen table, the table that had been theirs, since the first morning, the place where everything real between them had happened. See, she looked at the man she'd assembled piece by piece out of 7 weeks of proximity and conflict and honesty, and all the small ways he'd been, despite his failures and his silences, someone she could stand next to. See, I know, she said. He looked at her, waiting. I know you do, she said. See, and she pressed her lips together. I'm not good at this. See, I want you to know that in advance. Neither am I, he said. See, I've been managing it for a while. What I feel. See, treating it like a problem to be organized. She looked at her hands. See, it's not a problem. No, he said, it's not the arrangement. See, no, she looked up at him. I love you too, saying it felt like putting weight on a floor she'd been testing for weeks. See, it held. That's what I've been not saying. See, the kitchen was very quiet. Then he reached across the table and covered her hands with his, and she turned her hands over and held on, and they sat like that for a moment that didn't need anything added to it. See, but the hearing was still coming. The thing about loving someone honestly and being genuinely loved in return is that it doesn't dissolve practical problems. See, it doesn't make Gideon Voss go away, or Arthur Hines uncoerced, or the land title uncomplicated. See, Eliza knew this. She'd never been a person who believed that emotional resolution translated into external resolution. See, what it did was change what they were defending. See, Farr arrived 2 days before the hearing, with the information about Arthur Hines confirmed he had documented evidence, gathered through a contact in Red Willow, that Gideon had approached Hines twice in the past month. See, it wasn't airtight, but it was enough to impeach Hines's testimony if he appeared. See, it also meant Gideon knew they were onto it, which meant Gideon would change tactics. See, the night before the hearing, Eliza couldn't sleep. See, she was lying in the east wing her room, her four-posted bed with the good quilt. See, in the house that had become her home in ways she hadn't contracted for, and she was staring at the ceiling, doing the things she'd done the first night she'd ever been here. See, running through the stitches, looking for where the thread would pull wrong. See, she heard footsteps in the hall. They stopped outside her door. See, a knock. "Quiet, I'm awake," she said. The door opened. See, Silas stood in the doorway in the dark with the specific discomfort of a man who had knocked on a door at midnight and wasn't sure it had been the right decision. See, "I saw the light was out," he said. "I thought you might be." See, "Awake," she said, "and not sleeping." "Same." He came and sat in the chair by the window, the chair she used to put her sewing kit on, in the early days, which was now cleared and simply a chair. See, he looked out the window at the dark of the ranch, the faint shapes of the outbuildings, the edge of the ridge against the sky. See, "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said. "Don't," he said. See, "I wasn't going to say what you think." He looked at her. See, "I was going to say whatever happens tomorrow. I'm glad I walked through the wrong door." She held his gaze. See, "Even if it ends tomorrow, I'm glad." He was quiet for a moment. See, "It's not going to end tomorrow," he said. Not aggressively. See, with the specific conviction of a man who had decided something and was done undeciding it. See, "You don't know that." "No," he said, "but I know what we're walking in there with, and I know what he's walking in there with, and I know what I've watched you do in 8 weeks in this house." Something moved in his face. See, "Don't count us out." She looked at him in the dark. See, "Silas Rourke," she said. "Are you giving me a pep talk?" See, the almost smile. The real one. Brief and private and completely his. See, "I'm making a statement of fact." She almost laughed. See, she didn't quite, because it wasn't quite funny yet. See, but it was close. It was very close. "Go to sleep," she said. See, "You first." That's not, she stopped. "Fine." She lay back down. See, "Stay if you want. The chair's comfortable." He didn't answer immediately. See, "Then all right." She closed her eyes. See, he was still there when she fell asleep, which happened faster than she'd expected, because there is something about not being alone in the dark that makes the ceiling less high and the problems less loud, and the morning, when it comes, see, feel like something you might actually be able to meet. See, she slept. See, he sat in the chair by the window and looked out at the ranch that might not be his by this time tomorrow, and at the woman who had walked through the wrong door and built herself into every corner of the place he'd been defending alone for years. See, and he thought about his father's ledger and the contract and the 36 days that had been a death sentence until a stormy evening gave him an impossible option. See, and he thought, whatever tomorrow is, this was real. See, that was enough. He sat there until nearly dawn, and then he went to get dressed for the hardest day either of them had ever chosen to walk toward together. See, the territorial courthouse in Harwick was a building that took itself seriously. See, it was the kind of architecture that wanted you to feel small before you crossed the threshold, thick stone walls, tall, narrow windows. See, heavy double doors that swung inward with the specific weight of something that had been deciding pummels for decades and expected to keep doing so. See, Eliza had never been inside it before. She stood on the steps for exactly 3 seconds before she went through, which was as long as she allowed herself. See, Silas was beside her. Not touching, not performing. See, just there, in the way he'd learned to be there present and solid and not requiring anything from her in return for it. See, the hearing room was smaller than she'd imagined. See, a long table for the adjudicating panel. 3 men, territorial authority appointed rather than elected, which Farr had explained, meant they were somewhat insulated from Gideon's particular brand of social pressure, but not immune to it. See, chairs arranged on both sides of the central aisle. See, already half filled when they walked in. Eliza saw Pete first. See, he'd cleaned up, and it had cost him visibly the good shirt, the combed hair, the expression of a man performing respectability for a room it didn't come naturally to. See, he nodded at her, and she nodded back, and that small exchange steadied something in her that had been slightly off-kilter since dawn. See, Cal and Dewey were in the row behind Pete. Cal had his hat in his hands and was turning it slowly, which was what Cal did when he was working through something internally. See, he'd agreed to testify when she'd asked, not immediately, but after a pause that felt like genuine consideration rather than reluctance, and then with the specific blunt directness of a man who'd decided, I'll say what I saw. See, don't know what that's worth to you, but it's what I got. See, Berta was there, in her good dress, looking like Berta in a good dress, which was exactly like Berta in every other context except slightly more formal. See, she had brought food, which she'd been told not to bring, and had brought anyway, and a courthouse official was visibly uncertain about the basket she'd set under her chair. See, Mrs. Aldridge sat in the second row with her hands folded and her face arranged in the expression Eliza had come to understand as her version of full engagement, completely neutral on the surface, recording everything. See, and in the back row, which had required Pete to drive to Red Willow, and back in a borrowed wagon with extra cushioning for the journey, sat Ruth Marlowe. See, Eliza saw her mother and stopped moving for one half second. See, Ruth was pale. The trip had cost her. Eliza could see that, but she was straight-backed and clear-eyed, and when she met Eliza's gaze across the room, something passed between them that didn't need words and wouldn't have been improved by them. See, Silas had seen her too. He touched Eliza's arm just briefly. See, she knew what he meant. They sat down at the table on the left side of the room, across from the Voss table on the right. See, Gideon was already seated. He had a different lawyer today, not the briefcase man from the parlor, but someone older, someone who looked like he'd spent 30 years in rooms exactly like this one and had stopped finding them impressive. See, beside Gideon, a man Eliza didn't recognize, sat with the careful stillness of someone who had been told exactly where to be and was following instructions. See, she looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Silas. See, he'd seen the man too. Arthur Hines, he said quietly. See, she looked again. Arthur Hines was perhaps 60, weathered, with the specific expression of a man who had made a decision he wasn't entirely comfortable with and was committed to it anyway. See, she felt something she hadn't expected, not anger at him, not contempt. See, something closer to understanding. A man with a debt and no good options, caught between two forces that were not his fault. See, she wondered briefly what Gideon had offered him. See, then Farr sat down beside her and opened his case, and the panel entered and the hearing began. See, the first hour was procedural, and Eliza had been warned about it. See, documents, filings, the formal presentation of the challenge and its grounds. See, Gideon's lawyer laid out the case with the efficient clarity of someone who'd built it carefully. See, the marriage had been announced on the evening of the engagement party without prior notice. See, no evidence of correspondence existed prior to that date. See, no person in Red Willow or the surrounding territory could attest to a prior relationship. See, the marriage certificate had been filed 3 days after the event, not before, as a genuine marriage would have predated it. See, the circumstances were consistent with a fraudulent arrangement designed solely to circumvent valid contractual obligations. See, it was a clean argument. Eliza listened to it and acknowledged privately that it was a clean argument. See, the facts it contained were accurate. The interpretation of those facts was the battlefield. See, Farr presented their response. The marriage was legal and recorded. See, the motivation for a marriage did not determine its validity. Strategic marriages were common and recognized. See, the question before the panel was not why the marriage had occurred, but whether it was genuine, and genuine could not be reduced to prior public announcement or notarized correspondence. See, what mattered was what existed now, what had been built, what could be testified to by people who had witnessed it directly. See, one of the panel members, the one in the middle, who had a face like a man who'd been asked every possible question and was still waiting for one that interested him, looked up from the documentation and said, "See, the challenge includes the claim that no genuine marital relationship exists. See, we'll need testimony on that specifically. Both parties may call witnesses." See, Gideon's lawyer called Arthur Hines first. Hines came to the front of the room and sat in the witness chair and answered the preliminary questions with the compliance of a man reading from an internal script. See, he was from Red Willow. He'd lived there for 30 years. See, he knew the Marlowe family and had done business near them. See, he had no knowledge of any correspondence or relationship between Eliza Marlowe and Silas Rourke prior to the evening of the engagement party. See, he had spoken to others in Red Willow. He named 3 who confirmed the same. See, Gideon's lawyer sat down with the smoothness of someone well satisfied. See, Farr stood. He looked at Arthur Hines for a moment in the way of someone deciding where to start. See, Mr. Hines, he said, you stated you had no knowledge of correspondence between Mrs. See, Rourke and Mr. Rourke. Is that correct? That's correct, Hines said. See, would you have expected to have such knowledge? Were you in their confidence? See, a pause. No. So when you say you had no knowledge, you mean you personally were not informed. See, not that no correspondence existed. Another pause. See, longer. I suppose Mr. Hines Farr's voice was conversational, not aggressive. See, the tone of someone genuinely curious. Have you had any contact with Gideon Voss or representatives of the Voss family in the past 2 months? See, the room shifted. Just slightly. The air changed the way air does before weather. See, Hines's jaw tightened. I don't see what that has to do with. See, please answer the question, the middle panel member said. See, a silence that lasted 2 full seconds. He contacted me, Hines said. See, yes. And did that contact involve the outstanding debt you carry with the Rourke estate? See, Gideon was very still at his table. He mentioned it, Hines said. See, his voice had changed. Something in it had collapsed slightly, like a structure with a post pulled out. See, mentioned it how? Farr asked. The silence this time was the loudest thing in the room. See, Hines looked at his hands. Then he looked at Gideon. See, then he looked at the panel, and whatever he saw there, or whatever he'd been carrying for 2 months and hadn't been able to put down, made him do something that Eliza had not predicted. See, he said if I testified to what he needed, the debt would be forgiven, Hines said. See, and if I didn't, he'd call it in immediately. The room was completely silent. See, Gideon's lawyer was on his feet, objecting, using words like prejudicial and unsubstantiated. But the middle panel member was holding up a hand, and the other 2 were leaning toward each other. See, and Eliza sat at her table and watched Arthur Hines sit in the witness chair with the specific look of a man who had put down something heavy and was not sure yet whether he felt better or worse for having done it. See, Farr said quietly. To the panel, we have documentation of 2 meetings between Mr. See, Hines and a representative of the Voss family in the past 60 days. See, I'd like to submit it. He submitted it. The panel took 15 minutes to review it, during which the hearing room held a tight, charged silence that pressed against the walls. See, Eliza didn't look at Gideon. She looked at the table in front of her and thought about the ledger and the storage room and the water trough and the night before in the dark with the chair by the window. See, the middle panel member looked up. Mr. Hines's testimony as to the absence of prior correspondence will be stricken. See, its credibility is compromised. He looked at Gideon's lawyer with the expression of a man who had stopped being neutral on one particular question. See, proceed. Gideon's lawyer proceeded, but the shape of his case had changed. See, the clean argument had a crack in it now, and everyone in the room could see the crack, and the light coming through it was not flattering to the Voss side. See, Farr called Pete first. Pete came up and sat down and looked at the panel with the directness of a man who had nothing to hide and found the whole formal proceeding slightly bewildering, but was committed to getting through it correctly. See, how long have you worked for Mr. Rourke? Farr asked. See, 6 years, Pete said. And in that time, how would you describe his way of managing the ranch? See, capable, Pete said. Private. Does things his own way, doesn't explain himself much. See, good boss if you work hard, not so good if you don't. See, has that changed since Mrs. Rourke arrived? Pete thought about it in the genuine way, not the performed way. See, he talks more, he said. Not he's not a talker, Silas. See, but there's someone to talk to now, and he goes to her about things. See, not just ranch things, thinking things, he paused. See, I've worked here 6 years, and I've never seen him go to anyone about thinking things. See, can you give his example? The Henderson business, Pete said. See, the supply skimming. She found it. He didn't know it was there, or didn't want to see it. See, she put it on the table, and he dealt with it. He wouldn't have done that with anyone else, because he doesn't let anyone else that close to the operation. He shrugged, which was the most Pete gesture possible. She's close to it. That's not an act. Farr sat down. Gideon's lawyer tried to establish that Pete was a loyal employee with financial incentive to support his employer. Pete agreed that he was a loyal employee, said he'd be loyal regardless of what the panel decided, because that was between him and his conscience and his paycheck. And that the question of whether the marriage was real had nothing to do with his loyalties. The lawyer moved on. Cal came next and said, in exactly the blunt, unpretty words Eliza had known he'd use, what he'd seen, and what he thought of it. He told the story of the fence post, which drew a raised eyebrow from one of the panel members. He said that Eliza Marlowe, he used her birth name without seeming to notice, which was more honest than if he'd corrected himself, had come onto a working ranch as a stranger, and earned the trust of people who didn't give it easily. And that she'd done it not by performing the wife, but by being actually useful. That's not something you fake, he said. Not for 8 weeks. People see through that. Gideon's lawyer asked Cal if he'd ever witnessed any physical affection between Mr. and Mrs. Rourke. Cal looked at him with the expression of a man who had been asked something he found faintly ridiculous. They're not the hand-holding type, he said. Neither of them. But I've seen how he looks at her when she's not watching, and I've seen how she looks at him. That's not my business to describe in a courthouse, but it's not nothing. The lawyer moved on. Berta was brief and devastating in the way that direct people sometimes are. She said she'd worked at Briarstone for 11 years and cooked for Robert Rourke before Silas, and she knew this house like the back of her own hand. She said Eliza had not arrived as a wife and become a decoration. She'd arrived as a stranger and become the person Berta brought problems to when they needed solving, which was not a thing she did for guests or performers or people running a scheme. I've fed liars, Berta said, with the calm of a woman who had genuinely done so. They eat differently. They're somewhere else when they're at the table. She's here. She's been here since the first morning. The panel was listening differently now. Eliza could feel it, not a shift in their expressions, which remained carefully managed, but something in the quality of their attention. The case being presented to them had started as a legal question about documents and timing. It was becoming something else, something harder to rule on with a clean standard, but impossible to dismiss. Mrs. Aldridge testified with the precise economy of a woman who had 17 years of practice at saying exactly what was needed and nothing more. She described specific instances, the schedule adjustment. The morning she had come to Eliza with a household problem she would previously have taken to Silas and been told to handle it not dismissively, just because Silas trusted her to handle things and had taken to Eliza instead. And Eliza had handled it in a way that was better than what she would have done alone. She described the gradual process by which the East Wing room had stopped being a guest room and become something else. A home is not a building, Mrs. Aldridge said, with the tone of someone stating something obvious that people frequently failed to recognize. It's made by the people in it. She made herself part of this one. That takes longer to undo than any contract. Then Farr called Eliza herself. She sat in the witness chair and faced the panel and felt the full weight of the room. She was aware of Silas at the table behind her. She was aware of Pete and Cal and Berta and Mrs. Aldridge in the rows behind that. She was aware of her mother in the back row, straight-backed and clear-eyed and giving nothing away, because Ruth Marlowe understood that what mattered now was not her face, but her daughter's. Farr asked her to describe in her own words what had happened from the beginning. She did. She told the truth, all of it. The note about the gown, the storm, the wrong door, Lenora's voice, and the 200 people watching, Silas taking her hand. She told them about the kitchen table and the arrangement and the number and her mother's doctor bills and Clara's boots, and she watched the panel's faces as she said it because she was not afraid of what they'd see there. The truth of it was not flattering to the beginning. She knew that. But the beginning was not the whole story, and the whole story was the only defense that held. She told them about the supply records and the ledger and the conversation by the water trough. See, she told them about the social events and Margaret Hartwell's questions and the dinner where she'd said something true without meaning to. See, she told them what she'd said in Gideon's parlor about knowing Silas the coffee, the stillness, the attention that looked like inattention. And she said it again in this room. See, in front of the panel and the rows of witnesses and Gideon at his table, because it was true, and it had been true when she'd said it, and it was more true now. See, Gideon's lawyer stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Rourke, he said, with the specific pleasant precision of a man about to use a scalpel. See, you've described a marriage that began as a financial arrangement. See, yes, she said. And you've described your motivation as your family's financial situation. See, yes. So at the time of the marriage, you entered it for money. See, yes, she said. And he entered it to protect his land. See, neither of us was pretending otherwise to each other. She held the lawyer's gaze. See, we were two people in difficult situations who made an arrangement that suited both of us. See, that's not fraud, that's a negotiation. But the intent, see, intent to marry is not the same as the content of a marriage, she said. See, I've heard that argument and I understand why you're making it. See, but you're asking the panel to decide that the beginning of something defines the whole of it, and that's not how anything works. See, not marriages, not businesses, not people. She looked at the panel directly. See, I came to Briarstone to do a job. What happened after I got there was not the job. See, I didn't plan it and I didn't perform it, and it cannot be undone by calling it fraudulent. See, the lawyer tried one more angle. Mrs. Rourke, you mentioned a sum of money that was promised to you as part of the original arrangement. See, yes, are you still expecting that payment? The room was very quiet. See, Eliza had thought about this question. See, she'd thought about it since the night in the kitchen when Silas had said the thing he'd been holding for weeks, and she'd said it back, and they'd sat with their hands together in the quiet of a house that had become real between them. See, she'd thought about what the money meant and what it no longer meant and what the difference cost her and whether she was willing to pay it. See, she looked at Silas. He looked at her. No, she said. See, I'm not. Gideon's lawyer had not expected that. She could see it in the half-second delay before his next word. See, you're renouncing the agreed payment. What was agreed in that kitchen 8 weeks ago is not what exists between us now, she said. See, I didn't earn a payment. I built something. Those are different things, and they don't have the same currency. See, the lawyer sat down. Farr called one final witness. See, Ruth Marlowe made her way to the front of the room slowly, with the careful economy of movement that pain requires. See, and she sat in the witness chair with the composure of a woman who had been through worse and had the evidence on her face to prove it. See, she looked at the panel, and she looked at Gideon, and she looked at her daughter, and she squared her shoulders. See, Farr asked her one question. Mrs. Marlowe, in your observation of your daughter and Mr. Rourke, what did you see? Ruth was quiet for a moment. See, not hesitating, preparing. My daughter, she said, has been taking care of things since she was 16 years old. See, she's good at it. She's too good at it. Maybe she learned to manage everything from the outside and not let much in. She paused. See, I've watched her whole life, and I know what she looks like when she's managing something, and I know what she looks like when she's inside something. See, when she came home with that man the first time, in his wagon, with mud on her boots and a story I hadn't fully heard yet, she was inside something. See, she wasn't performing. She wasn't managing. She looked at Silas directly. See, my daughter doesn't give herself to arrangements. See, she's given herself to this. She stopped. That was all she had, and it was enough, and she knew it was enough. So she said nothing more. See, Farr rested. Gideon's lawyer made his closing argument with skill and composure and the gathering sense of a man bailing water from a boat that had already decided what it was going to do. See, the legal framework was sound. The challenge was legitimate. See, the motivations at the origin of this marriage were documented and undeniable. See, Farr made his closing argument with less elegance and more weight. See, the law recognized motivations but did not reduce marriages to them. See, the evidence of genuine relationship was consistent, corroborated, and uncoached. No witness had said the same thing in the same way. See, the attempt to coerce testimony through debt had been documented and admitted. See, what stood before the panel was a marriage that had begun imperfectly, as many things begin, and had become real by the only measure that mattered. The people in it had chosen it. See, the panel recessed. Eliza sat in the hallway outside the hearing room on a wooden bench that was not comfortable, and Silas sat beside her, and neither of them spoke for a long time. See, Pete brought her water at some point. She didn't remember drinking it. See, her mother sat 3 seats down with Clara. On one side of her, Clara had come with Pete on the return trip, had apparently refused not to come. See, which was so completely Clara that Eliza had felt a complicated rush of love and exasperation when she'd seen her in the doorway, and Thomas on the other, 14 years old, and trying very hard to look like he wasn't scared. See, Eliza caught Thomas's eye. "It's all right," she said. See, "You don't know that," he said, because Thomas was 14 and had read enough to know that reassurance was not the same as fact. See, "No," she agreed, "but it's going to be." He looked at her. See, then at Silas, then back at her. "He looks like he believes you," Thomas said. See, she looked at Silas. He was looking at her already. "See, he does," she said. The panel returned after 40 minutes. See, 40 minutes was not long, which Farr had told her beforehand could mean either thing, so she filed that information away and didn't try to read it. See, the middle panel member read the decision. The challenge was denied. See, the marriage of Silas Rourke and Eliza Rourke, née Marlowe, was recognized as legally valid and not subject to fraudulent misrepresentation under the applicable statutes. See, the contractual claim of the Voss estate against Briarstone Ranch was therefore dissolved, as the condition for its application, that Silas Rourke be unmarried, had not been met at the time of the deadline. See, the attempted suborning of witness testimony was noted in the record and referred for separate review. See, the panel member set down the papers and looked at both tables. See, "This matter is closed," he said. The room exhaled. See, Eliza sat very still for 1 second. See, then Pete made a sound beside her that was somewhere between a word and something that didn't need to be a word, and Berta said something emphatic under her breath that probably shouldn't have been said in a courthouse. See, and Clara made no attempt at all to be quiet, and simply said yes at a volume inappropriate for the setting. And Thomas, next to her, see, covered his face with both hands in the way of a 14-year-old who was not going to cry in public and needed a moment to ensure that outcome. See, Silas didn't move for a moment. Then he reached over and covered Eliza's hand with his, the same way he'd done in the kitchen 2 weeks ago, and she turned her hand over and held on. See, Gideon Voss stood. He was composed. He was always composed. See, he said nothing to Silas and nothing to Eliza, and he picked up his hat and his papers, and he walked out of the hearing room with the controlled dignity of a man who had lost and was not going to demonstrate it beyond the minimum. See, he did not look back. At the door he passed Lenora. See, Lenora had not been inside the hearing room. She'd been in the hallway, on a bench near the door for the entirety of the proceeding. See, she stood as Gideon approached, and they looked at each other, brother and sister. See, bound by blood and by the particular damage that powerful families do to each other when they use their members as strategy, and what passed between them was something private and complicated, and not Eliza's to read. See, Gideon said something quiet. Lenora said something back. See, he walked past her and out of the courthouse, and Lenora stood in the hallway as the hearing room emptied around her, and when Eliza came out, she was still standing there. See, their eyes met. Eliza stopped. She wasn't sure what she intended to say. See, she hadn't planned for this moment because she'd been focused on the moment before it. See, "Thank you," she said, "for telling us about Hines." See, Lenora looked at her. Something in her face was quieter than it had ever been in Eliza's presence. See, less arranged. "It was the right thing," she said. "See, that's the only reason." "I know," Eliza said. A pause. See, Lenora glanced toward the door where Gideon had gone. See, "He's not a villain," she said. "He's a man who learned that the world was a transaction and applied it everywhere. See, our father taught him that. Your father-in-law helped." She looked back at Eliza. See, "Some lessons are hard to unlearn, yes," Eliza said. "See, I know something about that too." See, Lenora nodded once and walked away down the hall, and Eliza watched her go and felt not warmth, exactly, and not forgiveness for the night of the party, which still sat somewhere in her chest like an unresolved chord. See, but something. The recognition of a person more complicated than the role she'd been given in the story. See, Silas was at her shoulder, all right? He said. Yes, she said. See, they went out into the Harwick afternoon. See, the ride back to Briarstone took 2 hours, and they made it in 2 separate wagons because there were too many of them for one Eliza with her mother and Clara and Thomas in the borrowed wagon, Silas ahead with Pete and the others. See, she watched the back of his wagon through the window and thought about the day and the decision and all the things that had been said in that room that couldn't be unsaid. See, Clara was asleep against her shoulder within 20 minutes because Clara could sleep anywhere, which was a skill Eliza had always envied. See, Thomas was reading he'd brought a book to the courthouse because Thomas brought a book everywhere, and Eliza had long since stopped considering this unusual. See, her mother was looking out the window at the land going past, and at some point she reached over and covered Eliza's hand with hers, and they sat like that for several miles without speaking. See, I liked what you said, her mother said finally, about not earning a payment. See, Eliza looked at the road. I meant it, she said. I know you did. Ruth paused. See, your father would have liked him. Eliza felt something shift behind her sternum. See, yeah? He would have been difficult about it at first. See, Rourke money, all that land. He'd have made himself suspicious on principle. She smiled slightly. See, but then he would have watched how that man looks at you, and he would have come around. See, Eliza thought about her father, about the gate that still creaked because fixing it felt like losing something. See, about the debt and the man with the patient eyes years ago, and her father coming home looking 5 years older. See, about the way inheritance could be a gift or a prison, depending entirely on what the person before you had decided, and how rare it was to be given a choice about which one it became. See, Mom, she said. Thank you for coming, for what you said in there. See, Ruth Marlowe looked at her daughter. I said what was true, she said simply. See, that's all I've ever been able to give you. See, Briarstone appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent, and something happened in Eliza that she'd felt once before, that involuntary quiet thing, the recognition that went below the level of decision. See, it looked like home because it was home, and it had been home for long enough now that the looking felt like arriving rather than approaching. See, the next weeks were not peaceful. See, peaceful was probably too much to ask for, and she wasn't sure she wanted it exactly. There was a version of peaceful that was just emptiness with better lighting, and she'd worked too hard to fill this place up to want it emptied out now. See, the referral against Gideon's witness coercion moved forward, which Farr managed with his small pencil and his methodical calm and the occasional letter that arrived and had to be read and responded to. See, the land title questioned the clause in Robert Rourke's old contracts. The one Eliza had found in the hidden ledger had to be formally addressed, legally unwound. The Voss claim on the title dissolved now that the marriage challenge had failed. See, but that process took months and involved Farr making trips and Silas signing things and Eliza reading documents and asking the questions that needed asking. See, she was good at asking the questions that needed asking. See, she was getting better at it. The ranch continued to be a ranch, which meant continuous practical emergency of varying severity, a difficult calving season in the spring. See, a water dispute with a neighboring property that Silas and Eliza resolved together with the same combination of her reading the documentation and him knowing the history and both of them being in the room when it mattered. See, Pete got a raise that was overdue, which he received with the dignified embarrassment of a man who'd never expected to be treated fairly and wasn't sure how to sit with it. See, Cal and Dewey came to Eliza before a major fence renovation to show her the method they'd worked out, which incorporated the adjustment she'd shown Cal months ago and several improvements they'd developed themselves. See, and she looked at it and said it was good, and they looked like men who had expected less and received more. See, Berta started teaching Clara to cook during school breaks, which Clara approached with the ferocious enthusiasm she brought to everything, and an initially catastrophic relationship with seasoning that improved over time. See, Thomas came to stay at Briarstone during the summer and spent most of it in the study, reading everything on the shelves, including with Silas's quiet permission the books that had been his mother's. See, something about that particular generosity, offered without ceremony and without expectation, settled Thomas's opinion of Silas into a form that lasted. See, Ruth Marlowe's health did not improve dramatically. See, there was no dramatic improvement to be had. Some conditions don't offer that. And Eliza had long since stopped waiting for the version of her mother's illness that resolved cleanly. See, what changed was the quality of the management, better doctors. See, consistent care. The specific relief of a family that had stopped making impossible calculations about which necessity to sacrifice for which other necessity. See, Ruth moved into a better house in Red Willow, one with proper heating and a room for Clara and enough space for Thomas to have somewhere to read that wasn't the kitchen table. See, she came to Briarstone for visits, and the creak of the Red Willow gate remained uncorrected, because Ruth had said the same thing Eliza had thought: fixing it would feel like losing something. See, Eliza and Silas had the argument about the eastern boundary water rights in March, and it was their worst argument. See, the kind that left both of them sitting in separate rooms at 10 at night, feeling the specific tired anger of two people who are right about different parts of the same problem. See, she was right about the documentation. He was right about the history. See, they worked it out the next morning over coffee, not because either of them had entirely given ground, but because they were both capable of holding two things at once when they made themselves do it. See, she was not always easy to live with. She knew that about herself without particular distress. See, she pushed. She reorganized things that didn't need reorganizing, and sometimes did it without sufficient notice. See, she had a tendency to take on more than she'd mentioned taking on, and then be surprised, in a way that surprised nobody else, when it became too much. See, she was stubborn in the structural way, the way that had kept her alive for years, and it served her, and it cost her, depending on what it was being applied to. See, he was not always easy to live with either. He went silent when he should have spoken, and spoke when silence would have served better, and had a stubbornness of his own that was differently shaped than hers, but equally immovable. See, he was better at managing the ranch than at managing the emotional architecture of being known by someone, and he was working on it, genuinely working on it. See, but working on something and having finished it are not the same state, and he was firmly in the first one. See, they were, in other words, two imperfect people living together in an imperfect arrangement that had become, through accumulated choice and accumulated time, a life. See, a year after the hearing, Briarstone hosted a gathering. See, not a party, in the way the engagement celebration had been a party. Not 200 of the wealthiest landowners in the territory assembled to witness a transaction. See, something smaller and less composed. See, ranch hands and their families, people from Red Willow who'd known Eliza growing up and had made the drive out of something between curiosity and affection, business partners who'd become something closer to friends. See, Berta had been cooking for 3 days and was not accepting input on the menu. See, Pete had organized the yard with the thoroughness of a man who understood that the event mattered and the details were how you showed that. See, Ruth was there, in a good chair in the best spot in the yard, with Clara on one side stealing food from the table behind Berta's back, with an expression of complete innocence that fooled nobody, and Thomas on the other, see, now 15, and a head taller than Eliza, who had opinions about everything and expressed them with the focused intensity of someone discovering that they had a mind and finding it interesting. See, Eliza stood at the edge of it all and watched, the way she sometimes stood at the edge of things to take stock before going further. See, the yard was full, and the evening was warm, and the light was the particular golden amber of summer evenings in open country that made everything look like something worth keeping. See, Silas came to stand beside her. He was holding something. See, "I have something for you," he said. She looked at what he was holding. See, it was the notebook. The small one they'd used in the first week, sitting at the kitchen table, building a history that didn't exist, filling it with facts about each other so they could pass as people who knew each other. See, the notebook she had forgotten about because the facts in it had become so thoroughly the real ones that the notebook itself had become redundant. See, she took it. She opened it. The early pages were what she remembered her handwriting and his, the two styles that didn't match. The careful inventory of a false life being constructed. See, Clara hates green. Thomas reads everything. Ruth will ask you questions. See, He takes his coffee without sugar. He goes still when he's decided something. See, she turned through the pages. The notebook was fuller than it should have been. See, past the pages she'd filled in. That first week, the writing continued his handwriting, not hers. Dated entries in the back half of the notebook that she hadn't seen. See, she read. They weren't facts for a performance. They were the other kind, the ones that accumulate when you stop paying attention to the fact that you're accumulating them. See, the date she'd come back from Red Willow with mud on her boots and a look on her face that he'd written down simply as she was glad to come home. See, the day of the supply room and the cold feeling and the confrontation recorded in 2 careful sentences, and then a third she was right. See, I should have told her from the start. The night in the parlor by the fire, months ago, when she'd said, I've been fighting to settle somewhere my whole life, and he'd written it down word for word because he'd understood, in that moment, see, that it was the truest thing he'd heard in a long time. See, page by page, month by month, the record of a man paying attention to a woman he had stopped pretending not to love. See, she reached the last written page and found one line, in the careful way he wrote things that mattered. See, she walked in through the wrong door, and it turned out to be the right one. See, I don't know how to explain that, except to say, some things are lucky and some things are chosen, and the best things manage to be both. See, below it, on the final blank page, see, in the same handwriting. See, will you keep choosing me when nothing forces you to? See, she stood in the yard of Briarstone Ranch, in the golden amber evening, with the notebook in her hands, and the sounds of the gathering behind her, and the man she'd been choosing for a year standing beside her. See, and she thought about the wrong door and the right one, and the seamstress from Red Willow who'd walked through it because she needed money, and the man who'd grabbed her hand because he needed freedom. See, and what had happened in the space between those 2 desperate needs when neither of them was looking. See, she found the pencil in her pocket. She always had a pencil, an old habit, the seamstress habit, of having what you need before you need it, and she wrote beneath his question the only answer she had. See, which was the same one she'd been living for 12 months. See, every day. She handed it back to him. He read it. He looked at her in the way he had the private one, the real one, the one that had nothing performed in it. See, she reached up and fixed his collar, which was slightly crooked, because it was crooked, and she noticed things that were crooked, and he let her. And when she dropped her hand, he caught it and held it, simply and without ceremony. See, and they stood like that while the evening continued around them. See, Briarstone was not the property his father had built anymore. See, it was not the embattled empire that Gideon Voss had tried to claim. See, it was something that had been through fire and come out differently shaped, smaller in some ways, stronger in others. See, run by 2 people who had stopped pretending to each other and found that honesty was a harder and better foundation than anything either of them had started with. See, the land was theirs, fully legally, finally. Farr had confirmed it in a letter that had arrived the previous month in his characteristic minimalist style, title clear. See, claim dissolved. Congratulations. 3 sentences. See, exactly right. The workers had stayed, most of them. See, a few had left over the months, and new ones had come, and the new ones had come into a place that was different from the place the old ones described when they talked about the years before. See, not easier ranches weren't easy but clearer about what it was. See, clearer about who ran it and what they valued and what was expected and what was offered in return. See, Pete still brought her bad news first because he'd decided early that she handled it better and that had never changed. See, Cal still came to her when there was something practical to solve and the fence posts held. See, Berta still saved the good coffee for early mornings, which was now Silas's early mornings too, because somewhere in the past year the kitchen had stopped being Eliza's domain and become theirs. See, which was a thing neither of them had announced, and both of them understood. See, Mrs. Aldridge had said, once, near the end of the previous winter, in the particular neutral tone she used for things she considered settled, this house runs better than it ever has. She had not elaborated. See, she hadn't needed to. Clara, eating stolen food at the edge of the gathering, caught Eliza's eye across the yard and grinned the gap-toothed grin that had been part of Eliza's world since the day she was born. The tooth had grown back. Eventually, see, But Clara's grin retained its particular quality of looking like someone who was getting away with something, which was accurate, often enough to be a useful signal. See, Thomas, deep in conversation with one of the business partners, about something that was clearly becoming an argument that Thomas was currently winning. See, looked up and found Eliza watching, and gave her the small nod of a person who had watched his sister build something from the outside and had been paying close enough attention to understand what it had cost and what it was worth. See, her mother, from her good chair in the best spot in the yard, met her eyes and smiled. See, just that. Just her mother smiling at her across a yard full of people on a summer evening in a life that was real. See, Eliza held Silas's hand and stood in the yard of the ranch that had started as a lie and become the truest thing she'd ever lived in. And she thought not for the first time, see, but with a clarity she hadn't always had about what had actually happened here. See, a woman had walked through the wrong door because she had no better options. See, a man had taken her hand because he was desperate and a little bit reckless and more afraid than he'd admitted. See, and the thing that neither of them had planned for, the thing that no arrangement could have contracted for and no legal challenge could have dissolved, was that somewhere between desperation and proximity and honesty and the long, imperfect, daily work of choosing each other, they had built something that belonged to them in a way that nothing inherited ever fully can. See, not to his father's legacy, not to the Voss family's ambitions. See, not to the story of the engagement party, or the stormy evening, or the wrong door. See, to them. The sun finished its descent behind the ridge, and the yard lights came up, and the gathering continued. See, and Briarstone held them all, the imperfect and the stubborn, and the ones who'd stayed, and the ones who'd come back, and the woman who'd fixed things since she was 16, and the man who'd finally let her fix the right one. See, she didn't walk through a door looking for this. See, but she'd learned, in a year of building something she hadn't planned for, that the things you find when you're looking for something else are sometimes the only things worth finding, because you can't engineer your way to them. See, you can't arrange them on a kitchen table. You can only arrive at them by being honest enough and stubborn enough and brave enough to stay in the room when it gets hard. See, she had stayed. He had stayed. And Briarstone, in the golden light of the evening, was proof that staying imperfect, costly, unglamorous staying was its own kind of courage. See, the kind that didn't need a witness, though it had gathered quite a few anyway.